get it started. I don't know why I did that. So, today we are going to be debunking myths about ancient Egypt that we hear about in the media. I have all the major ones kind of prepared to chat about, but if there is a statement that you guys have heard about and you're not really sure, feel free to ask it and we can debunk it live. Just so you guys know, we're not talking about aliens. We're not going to be talking about race theory. We're not going to be talking about pyramids being magnets. We're avoiding all of those conspiracy theories and such, and aiming for statements or thoughts that have kind of been taught or talked about over and over and over again for many years by the general public that are either inaccurate or completely wrong. Yeah, no aliens. There's no point, I feel like. Like, what I'm really focusing on are the things that sound real, that, like, somebody who does not have the backing that, like, I do and a lot of you guys do might sound real, and then you realize it's actually not true. Rather than talking about the things that are just kind of, like, straight up crazy. This is not going to be, like, a time period, Moxie, no. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go in chronological order of these myths. So we're going to talk about the ones that are, these myths that are focused about actual ancient Egypt. And then we will go to ones that are, like, talking about Egyptomania. Egyptian worshiping cats, I did not include because you guys have heard me talk about it before and I completely, like, forgot about it, surprisingly, but yes, I did not include that, but we will definitely talk about it. It's not, I'm just gonna say this, that is a personal vendetta that I have rather than an actual, like, myth like the ones that we're gonna talk about tonight. So that is more a personal vendetta and a personal annoyance that I have rather than, like, an actual, like, myth. You guys will see kind of the theme of the stuff. So yeah, so we're going to go through all these ones that are talked about in reference to ancient Egypt. Then there's going to be a few that are about, like, Egyptomania and things that have happened outside of ancient Egypt but involved Egypt. Yeah, Baha, that's like, it is. It's that, like, it is more of a personal annoyance that if people asked if ancient Egyptians were dog or cat people, I think most people would say cat people, even though I believe the opposite. And so it's not as much of a myth as it really is. So I will also mention we did talk about some of these last week when we did our lecture with Moohoodles. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail than I was able to on her stream, but we are going to actually hit on a couple of them that we talked with her. So let's get started. First, we are going to start talking about the myths that surround the pyramids, because there are quite a few of them. And again, not conspiracy myths. One of the most popular ones is going to be this one, that slaves built the pyramids. And as we know, this is a myth. So the first person who actually made this allegation was this guy named Josephus, who was a Jewish historian in 94 CE. And his statement that slaves built the pyramids, that was then popularized during the Renaissance period. Now, this myth probably stemmed out of Judeo-Christian religion, specifically the tales of Joseph and Moses in Egypt. If you don't know either of those two stories, I'll give you a quick little summary. Because they actually are connected. People don't really associate them being connected, but they actually are. Because in the story, when Joseph was enslaved by his brothers and sold off into Egypt, he eventually becomes very well connected with the pharaoh after solving his dreams and warning the country of a famine and drought. Then, after he reveals himself to his brothers, who have come from Canaan to kind of escape this famine and drought, he invites them all to stay in Egypt with all of their families. All of the descendants of these Canaanites who have settled in Egypt then become the Jewish slaves that were enslaved in Egypt during the tale of Moses. There's obviously a couple hundred years in between those, but that is kind of how that process happens. I learned about this in my uh, my mythical my myth and literature class, in which I thought we were going to be learning about like Greek myths and Norse myths, and no, the first myth that we dived into was the actual Old Testament of the Bible. So the whole thing is, you think of the Bible, a lot of people, some people say that it is completely true, some people that say it is all like stories and stuff. And the big deal is, like, even from a literary standpoint, the story of Moses would never have existed without the story of Joseph. And they are interconnected in that way. And so this theory that the slaves built the pyramids, or this myth, talks about them building these massive monuments, but then there's nothing specific in these texts to say that they are pyramids. Like, when you look at the Bible and you delve into it, they never really say what they are building. And in addition, even though I don't really give a lot of credence to biblical archaeologists, they actually associate the story of Moses to be closer to the New Kingdom. So that's at least 1,000 years after the pyramids were built. So there kind of are two facets to this story, is that like slaves built the pyramids or Jewish slaves built the pyramids. And both of them have really no credence to it. So if they didn't build the pyramids, who did? Through very recent archaeological work, it has been determined that the main builders of the pyramids were a conscripted workforce who were housed and paid for their efforts. Both the town and the cemetery of the workers has been discovered very close to the pyramids. There is a lot of graffiti and a lot of archaeological evidence that have brought us to this conclusion. The village itself includes communal sleeping quarters, bakeries, breweries, kitchens, copper workshops, a hospital, and the cemetery. There was evidence that the workers were making bread, beer, and eating both beef and fish. And the cemetery, there actually is evidence of those who were possibly injured or may have even died due to accidents. None of the people that have been discovered in the cemetery were mummified, but many were given mud brick tombs with bread and beer to support them in the afterlife. And essentially, all this evidence tells us that the main people building the pyramids were about 10,000 skilled craftsmen and laborers. Thank you, Naderfiend, for 1 month. Absolutely. Yes, this is one of those things that is taught in some cases. I have found a lot of the ones that we're going to talk about are not necessarily taught, but I find this one is one of the more probable ones that's like actually taught in schools. Because, and I will say, truly, the discovery of like the workers' cemetery and the workers' town within the last 40 years. So it's not that unlikely that some of these textbooks are old, or that some of these teachers are still old teaching these things. Like a lot of these discoveries were made in the 80s and 90s, if not a little bit more recently. Mark Lehner, who is the Egyptologist who has been excavating the Giza Pyramid site for many, many years, has made a lot of these discoveries, and has kind of made it his almost commitment to kind of continue to learn more about the pyramid builders and everything. So I will say the word conscripted is a little bit weird and in the way it's used, but it is essentially in a way that you are conscripted like to the military. So we know that these groups would probably work in 3-month shifts, and then they would go back to wherever they lived. And they were probably farmers and laborers. I know, Remember Beards, I was about to say 30 years, and then I realized that it's 2025, and so I realized I had to give it 40 because I'm 30. So I was going to say 30, thinking I would be covering the 90s, and I was like, wait, that's barely covering the 90s. Yes, it is crazy to think that they would be in there, but they are still taught, and I would have to look deeper to see if it is like mainly being taught in like more like religious schools, but that is a possibility. I went to Catholic school my whole life. I don't remember being taught this, but knowing my school, I wouldn't doubt it. I'll just throw that out there, because another thing, back to like somebody else's question very early on, like why I got into Egyptology. I've loved Egypt since I was a kid, mostly because of what I learned about it in uh, in religion, in religious classes, which is kind of silly because they are kind of seen as the villain. But I was just obviously so fascinated by them, so I prompted myself to learn more about them, which is great. Exactly how curious minds should work. Um, so yeah, the majority of these people would be laborers, and they would have just lived in different things, like in farmers and stuff. Like they would live on farms, and they would live in other places. And somebody would come in and say, "Hey, you are being asked to come to the pyramids, come to Giza, and you guys are gonna help us." And the key thing is that like they were fed. Like there's no money in ancient Egypt at all up until the very, very end when the Persians introduce it, and then the Greco-Romans. So like you are paid by housing and by food. And so like they're coming in, and potentially they could have been getting a nicer accommodation and better food than they may have been getting at their home. Because for the most part, bread and beer are the standards. You would have essentially been given wheat, well, sorry, not wheat, barley or emmer, whatever grain is currently growing, but they didn't have our modern day wheat. They used barley and emmer. And then you yourself, or you would know your brewer friend or your baker friend, you would give in that, and then you would get a certain amount of bread and beer back. But since we do have evidence of both fish and beef, that potentially is a middle class diet that some of these people may have not had access to previous to them coming to work for the pyramids. We also know, like, in addition to these laborers who were conscripted, there were also obviously architects and masons and metalworkers and carpenters who may have either lived there permanently or lived there on like a longer stint, because you needed those highly skilled laborers to obviously be able to do any of those things. Any questions about that one so far? I'm gonna make sure I drink after every single section. Hi, Bev. Welcome to the lecture. You have not missed much. Only that slaves didn't build the pyramids. That's the only one we've covered so far. So let's go to the next one. So this one is the one that we talked about on Moohoodle's stream last week, and we're going to go into a little bit more detail. But you may have heard that the pyramids of Giza are lined up with the stars in Orion's belt. Or at least they lined up with the stars in Orion's belt when they were built. And guess what? This is a myth. This is a myth. This is not real. I literally did not discover this until I was doing research for Moohoodle's stream last week. But it is a myth. And it's not just a myth. This actually stems into conspiracy theories. And I'm still covering it because it is still something that is talked about and you see it different places. It's a fringe theory, which means it's kind of in between conspiracy theory and like actual stuff. Thank you, Woods. I'm so glad you're here. Yeah, so yes, we will cover all of that, Vev. So this theory in specific is called the Orion correlation theory. It was first proposed in 1989 by Robert Bauval, who is a writer and a researcher with absolutely no background in Egyptology, archaeology, or astronomy. I tried to find one, and he's Egyptian. That's the only background he has. He was born in Egypt, but to a Belgian and a Maltese family, and worked the majority of his life as a construction engineer. Hi, welcome to the live. We're doing a little lecture today. So this paper was published in the journal Discussions in Egyptology, and originally it was pointing out the connection between the layout of the three main stars in Orion's belt and the three pyramids of Giza. Oh, Roxy, yeah, that's another one. This is not true. Yes, We're breaking myths. We're myth busting today, guys. I want to play the Mythbusters theme song. That's all I've been thinking about. Is I'm a Mythbuster. This is not true, and I did not know this until literally a couple weeks ago. So I'm not blaming anybody. And we're gonna talk about like why it's crazy. But I specifically put this image here because this is the thing that you guys see. Like this is the way that a lot of these myths are put out there on the internet. Is they just like put up one little picture and this just little statement and people will believe it. And this one I truly did think was real because I know how connected to the stars and connected to like the solstice and the calendar, like the ancient Egyptians were very good at that. And so this, when it came out as a myth, I was like, wait a second, this is confusing. So sorry for the blurry pictures. That's all I could find. But here we go. So it was then expanded by Adrian Gilbert and the fucking crazy Graham Hancock, in separate publications, all in the mid 1990s. These theories expanded the original one that the pyramids were not just aligned with the stars when they were actually built, excuse me, but they were aligned with the stars when the pyramids were built 10,000 BCE, i.e., when these scholars believed that the pyramids were built. So there is this, like, this is where we step into the fringe theory. We step into the conspiracy theory. I don't know much about, like, Bovell, like, it doesn't seem like he had that portion of it, but it does seem that after he published this, he has now gone along with all of the other fringe archaeology, like pseudo-archaeology people. But it does, I'm not 100% sure in this, but it does seem that, like, at the beginning, it was a little bit more innocent, but he has seemed to kind of go around. So this is a tweet from Graham Hancock saying, "Kudos to my great friend Robert Bovell for his Orion correlation theory, a work of genius for which he has suffered the slings and arrows of jealous academics. The late, great John Anthony West used to call them quackademics, who want to bury his groundbreaking work." So, don't we love other scholars being so nice to us? Yes. And I honestly think this is crazy because I had never heard of Graham Hancock before the recent, and I mean like semi-recent Netflix thing. But he was doing this in the 90s. Like, and I just thought that was kind of crazy to me that I like had never heard of him or heard of any of these crazy theories. This is a separate hypothesis, but I just had to point out this image, guys. I just had to point out this image because not only is it's like, oh, the three stars in Orion over here are lining up with the pyramids, but then, I'm sorry, there's something lining up with the 8th of October city, which has not existed until extremely recently. The image just cracked me up. I couldn't even like look at it. Like Zawid El Aran is like an area, but like desert ? Like, I'm sorry, this is like the craziest cover of a book I've ever seen in my life. Yeah. So this is all crazy. But let's go into it a little bit deeper. So they believe that the three pyramids were a terrestrial map of the three stars along with the Sphinx itself. And I will answer that question, user. Absolutely. That's a very good question. Give me like 2 seconds to continue this and we'll debunk it and I'll answer that question. Absolutely. So they believe that the three pyramids are a terrestrial map of the three stars of Orion, and that also includes the Sphinx, because they also believe that the Sphinx was constructed in 10,500 BCE, and that the lion itself was meant to be a reference to the constellation Leo. And then in this entire map, the Nile River is supposed to reflect the Milky Way. That is their theory. And this is also stemming all back to the theory that the pyramids are older than they actually are, and blah, 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 and that they're probably built by... who knows? It all stems to a very, very racist theory that the belief that the African nations are not qualified and were not smart enough to build all these structures. And so there is a very, very old and outdated theory that I think stems to a lot of these current conspiracy and alien theories. That was a very racist ideal that a European group came in probably 10,000 years ago, uh, like wiped out the African nation, and they are the ones who actually built the pyramids and all these different structures. So that is like this kind of umbrella theory, and then all of these new conspiracy theories all semi stem out of these, even if they're not really saying. I might make a TikTok about this, but I am kind of terrified for the crazies. But I might. I might make a video about this. Because now I now have much more research into it, so I might do a video on this. But yeah, it's a fringe theory, so it does stem on the craziness, but yeah, I think I could make a video about it. So let's debunk this myth. I know it's so hard. It's just crazy sometimes. So I'll answer a user's question. So if this is not, if the Orions things, why did they play? Is there any reason for the placement? Not necessarily. It's this location is a very large outcropping of bedrock, and so there's no necessarily reason that they chose this location. It's very close to a lot of different things and would be very accessible. On a more specific note, when you look at the three pyramids, you can kind of see them here. You'll see that the last pyramid, Menkaure, is much smaller. Menkaure, there is a theory that Menkaure's pyramid was supposed to be bigger, but when they started building, they realized that just south of Menkaure's pyramid, the bedrock dropped off. Like they are on this big plateau of bedrock, and the bedrock completely drops off, and so they had to shrink Menkaure's pyramid. It was not meant to be this big. So beyond that little ideal, really, no, nothing specific. So, okay, so let's debunk this myth. So on the Egyptology side of this debunk, we know that the Giza pyramids are also built at different times, built by Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, and it would imply that if they wanted to align these pyramids with the stars of Orion, that this would be a lot of planning, like ahead of time, which is definitely fine, like definitely possible. But and these three men are related. They're three generations of kings, if not four technically. There's one tiny king in between that didn't build a pyramid. But Khafre never met Menkaure. They were not alive at the same time, and so it would just be a little bit of extensive planning if they're really trying to do this over many generations. That's not like honestly the worst part about it. It's just we know that they were built at different times. In addition, when you're looking at the age of the Sphinx, there are many theories that claim that it is older based on tests of the physical stone of the Sphinx. And as I've mentioned a couple different times, the Sphinx is actually a yardang. It is a natural outcropping of bedrock that comes out of wind and sand erosion. And so yes, the stone itself is actually older. It's much older because it's stone. It's old. It's built thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago. But it would automatically be older than when the ancient Egyptians decided to modify it. So kind of referencing that. Yes, exactly. That is harder to do. There is only one. There are other sphinxes, but when you're looking at the Great Sphinx of Giza, there is only one. There's only evidence of one. But there are many other smaller sphinxes, obviously. Now, on the astronomy side, it's a little bit harder for me to explain because I just don't know that much about astronomy, but we're going to try to explain the different critiques and such. So, there are two main astronomers named Ed Krupp and Tony Farrell who use planetarium equipment to independently investigate the angle between the alignments of the stars in Orion's belt and north during the eras cited by the other authors. So we do know that the angle differs from the angle that it is today. We obviously know that. Or from the third millennium, because we know when the pyramid and the Sphinx were actually built. And this is because of the precession of equinoxes, which is the gravity-induced, slow and continuous change in the orientation of the astronomical body's rotational axis. In our way. How they measured these angles to 1 minute. I do not know. I do not, Bev. This is the whole thing, is the Egyptians did not do anything. This is how we are measuring it. They're measuring it from the top. From the tippy top. Hi Julia, welcome. So, these astronomers found that the angle was somewhat different from the very perfect match, which I'm, quotation, the very perfect match, which is what Bauvel and Hancock say in their theory. So they estimated 47 to 50 degrees per the planetarium measurements compared to the 38-degree angle formed by the pyramids themselves. So you can see here, 38-degree angle, and then you have this one. I took from a ResearchGate article. So 53 in 2000. 2008. So this is 2000 CE. This is 2000. Like only 25 years ago, and then in 2550 BCE it was 74. So 2500 is close to when the pyramids were made, but obviously the angle is very off. Krupp did also point out that the slightly bent line formed by the three pyramids was deviated towards the north. Whereas the slight kink in the line of Orion's belt was actually deformed to the south. And essentially, to match them up together, you actually had to turn them upside down. Because do you see here how the compasses say north, and north in this angle is down. So it's completely flipped on its other side. Yeah, Julia, we talked about that as well. So the Orion correlation theory does not, it says that they lined up not when the pyramids were built around 3000 years or 3000 BCE. They say that it lined up in 10,000 BC. So it's very confusing. And very old, because they say, oh, it's 10,000 BC, that's when the pyramids were built. I'm like, but they don't line up either way. That's the best part about this whole thing, is they don't line up in either time period. And so what Krupp, this astronomer, says is that when you look at the original book that was published about this correlation theory, that's actually what they literally did. They literally flipped it upside down and said, oh, it lines up. But it doesn't. So they also pointed out the different problems with the argument that the Sphinx is meant to represent the constellation of Leo. And essentially, if it was supposed to be Leo, then it should actually be on the opposite side of the Nile. Because remember, they're saying that the three stars of Orion, and then the pyramid, or the Sphinx, and then the Milky Way is the Nile. They say that if it was supposed to be Leo, it was supposed to be...
is a river in Egypt!
Hi, Ruby! Leo would be on the opposite side of the Milky Way, because Orion and Leo are on opposite sides of the Milky Way. Not the same side. Now, mainly... Thank you, Room Microbrews. Okay. So mainly, this is because the vernal equinox in 10,000 BC was in Virgo and not in Leo. And to kind of top it all off, the zodiac constellations as we know them today, i.e. Leo, Virgo, like all of these words, originated in Mesopotamia and were completely unknown in Egypt until much later in the Greco-Roman era. So, the constellation of Leo during ancient Egyptian times had nothing to do with a lion. Like, nothing to do with a lion. Like, that was not an Egyptian invention. The Egyptians did not have names for the constellations until after the Greco-Roman period, or at least until Mesopotamia brought them in, but they don't really even talk about them until the Greco-Roman period. So yeah, it's a whole big crazy thing. There's also a whole other thing, I forgot about this, that there are these shafts in the Great Pyramid of Giza that supposedly point out, and those were meant to represent and line up with the different stars. I didn't look into that one as much, but that one's a whole different thing, and you can read it along with this flat Earth Orion pyramid picture that I found, which I thought was really cool. Hi FICO, welcome on in. So, oh, happy wedding anniversary, Ruby. Oh, poor, but she got sick. That's okay. She's gonna be good. It's gonna be good. I hope you still had a nice day. We are talking about we're myth busting tonight. Myth busting some ancient Egyptian myths. So, this has been a pretty prominent myth. As I showed, literally this image that's on the right, like, gets thrown around all over the internet, Facebook, like places that people will see it a lot. And essentially, it seems plausible, and it really does, because the ancient Egyptians were very in tune with the stars and with equinoxes and solstices. For example, like Abu Simbel, it lines up with one of the solstices every year, where the sun rises and it goes straight down the middle corridor of Abu Simbel all the way back to the Holy of Holies, where the 4 statues are of 3 gods and Ramses the Great. And like, they were so in tune with that and figuring that out, that this seems very plausible, and obviously has been something that I believed was true for a long time, because I thought, well, it seems possible. But what I found was so crazy about this is that I did not expect, when I did research for this, we did it because last week we spoke with a astrobiologist on our stream, and she asked me this question, and I was like, perfect, I'll go find an answer. I had a feeling that I was going to find out that it was a myth. I did not expect it to be a fringe theory. Like, that was what really blew my mind, is that, like, I thought it really was possible, but I thought, oh, maybe people say that and it just seems like that. No, I could not believe that this was actually like a fringe pseudo archaeology theory. That kind of blew my mind. So yeah, whenever you guys see anything that you're not really sure about, you're always fine to send me a message, or just look into it a little bit deeper than normal. All right, next one. For those who weren't here earlier, I have to give blood tomorrow, so I have to drink a lot of water because I'm always very dehydrated. So we're gonna have to take a couple breaks for me to go refill this and probably pee, because I never drink that much water. So, pharaohs left curses to anyone who disturbed their tomb. Now, obviously, this falls into a little bit of spiritualism. We're not going to... I don't believe in curses. I semi-believe in mumbo-jumbo like things happening for reasons and stuff. But I don't... When it comes to ancient Egypt, I don't believe in curses. Do I believe in curses outside of Egypt? Maybe. So, this is kind of the statement that gets put out, and see... Same problem here. Yeah, I got turned away once because she told me I was too dehydrated, and I was like, what? What do you mean? So, we need to stay hydrated. I also have to fast until 11:30 tomorrow because I've made my appointments in the wrong order. So, this is a myth. A myth, guys. So I don't know how many of you guys were here when we did this lecture. I realized it was one of our earliest lectures. I should probably bring it back. But curse theories. So I have a huge lecture all about ancient Egyptian curses, and in the modern era, like in Egypt, in Egyptomania, and like how curse theories came about. and it's one of my favorite lectures that I did, and I forgot about it, and I feel like we should bring it back because I think a lot of you guys who have never seen it would like it, because there's a lot of crazy things that are not, you think it's all going to be about Tutankhamun, and it's absolutely not. But the curse theories that I talk about are like in the modern era, after tombs have been like excavated, and it's like curse on more modern people. We are talking more in this aspect of like people, pharaohs leaving actual text to curse anyone, and that is mostly obviously put towards tomb robbers in ancient Egypt, not anything, not obviously modern people. And so this is a sort of a, it's not a myth. It is sort of a myth. It's sort of, as you can see, it's a myth. Yeah, it's like, it's a warning. I don't like using the word curse. It's a warning. And it is on the obviously more mystical, spiritual side and stuff. It is not, Roxy. It is the third. It is the third major curse theory. And it, the best part about the entire lecture is that, the best part about the entire lecture is that it, all in all, it accumulates is that every single modern curse theory has come from the British media. And it's a wild thing knowing how the British media works now. It's a wild kind of like conclusion to come to, especially because like I'm a big like royal family fan, and so I've seen how like the yeah. Nope, not the first one. Not the first. There are two even really prominent ones before it. Not too long before it, but so there is documented evidence. That's why there's the sort of at the top here. There is documented evidence of this. I just want to kind of clear the air of what these curses sound like, and what they kind of are. Just so kind of everyone understands it. There are a couple myths on here, and I'm using quotation. There are a couple myths that are sort of true, but are inaccurate in general. Because this is a rare thing. Not every single pharaoh did this, and it's just not everybody did this. There's only a few, in comparison to how many people have been buried in ancient Egypt, obviously. The rope is probably made out of flax. I'm gonna throw that out there. That's probably the truth. A lot of the two earlier curse theories, one does involve the British Museum, but it's not. The British Museum actually had to, one of the early curse theories, they actually had to release a statement saying there was no curse. So it's actually not the British Museum, which is kind of fun. Oh no, I love Meghan. I'm a Meghan Markle fan all the way. I am a royalist in that I know a lot about the royal family. I don't necessarily like the royal family because I'm a Meghan Markle fan all the way. Sorry, Roxy. Sorry. I'm trying to read my notes and read two chats at the same time. Oh, one of the first you have heard about. I get you now. I got you now. Okay. She is a Sussex, absolutely. As much as other royalists would hate it for her to be. Okay, we're getting sidetracked. Okay, so there are actual statements that are written down as a warning or as a way to protect a tomb. But these are obviously not real curses, and they are fairly rare in general. So, I want you guys just to kind of understand like what these curses actually are and stuff. And I want everyone to kind of, as I talk about these and read some of the examples I have, I want you kind of to think about, like, are the ancient Egyptians, were they actually cursing these people? Or is it just something to write? Is it just a warning? I want you guys to kind of think about, like, the reasoning behind this, because you also have to remember a vast majority of ancient Egyptians could not read. And tomb looters are probably within that population. So what are these actually for is a big kind of question that I want you guys to kind of just like contemplate. We'll discuss a little bit at the end of it and stuff. So there are very few of these writings. I was able to find a lot of them. I was pretty happy with how many that I found, and I ended up finding more, though a lot of them I wasn't able to find good sources for them, so that's another kind of cautious thing and stuff. So, and a lot of these don't have photos, so all I have here, this is Tutankhamun's tomb, because of course the number one thing when you Google Curse of the Pharaohs is Tutankhamun. So the two pictures I have here, this is the sealed shrine of Tutankhamun, and the next picture I have is one of his sealed boxes. So you can see here the little tiny seal. This has the 9 enemies on it, kind of bound and prisoner and stuff. So one of the, we don't have a lot of them in the Old Kingdom. Thank you so much, Garrett Sen, for the follow. Welcome on in. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. Okay, so we don't really have any evidence of these in the Old Kingdom, pretty much at all. Some of the earliest ones we have are from the 9th and 10th dynasty, and this is from the tomb of Ankh-Tifi. Ankh-Tifi is one of my favorite tombs because he has a lot of dogs in there. But his tomb does contain one of these warnings, and I quote, "Any ruler who shall do evil or wickedness to this coffin may Hemen," who is a local deity, "not accept any goods he offers, and may his heir not inherit." So that is the warning. Actually, sorry, we do have an earlier one. This is the 6th dynasty. So we do have some 6th dynasty's Old Kingdom. Yeah, 6th dynasty's Old Kingdom. But this is, I think, the oldest one. Although there is one that says it's from a pyramid builder's tomb, but I couldn't find any actual like evidence as to what tomb that was, where it is, and if it's actually a pyramid builder's tomb. So keep these all with caution. So this one comes from the 6th dynasty tomb of Kentika Ikeki, and this inscription says, "As for all men who shall enter this my tomb, impure, there will be judgment, an end shall be made for him. I shall seize his neck like a bird. I shall cast the fear of myself into him." And then this one from the pyramid builder's tomb says, "All people who enter this tomb who will make evil against this tomb and destroy it, may the crocodile be against them in the water and snakes against them on the land. May the hippopotamus be against them in the water, the scorpion on land." So then, which one is this one? True. Papyrus is, that was my second option, is what I was thinking of. For rope. So then this one is from the tomb of Serenput I, who was a nomarch of Elephantine in the 12th dynasty. Thank you so much, Procyon. Thank you so much for the follow. Welcome. "As for every mayor, every wab priest, every scribe, and every nobleman who shall take the offering from the statue, his arm shall be cut off like that of this bull, his neck shall be twisted off like that of a bird, his office shall not exist, the position of his son shall not exist, his house shall not exist in Nubia, his tomb shall not exist in the necropolis, his god shall not accept his white bread, his flesh shall belong to the fire, his children shall belong to the fire, his corpse shall not be to the ground, I shall be against him as a crocodile on the water, as a serpent on earth, and as an enemy in the necropolis." So these are some pretty detailed, and they do obviously fall into these curses kind of thing. But remember, nobody can read these. And to be honest, some of these people who actually are in this tomb might not actually be able to read themselves. So these are just statements. Oh, Julia, we're gonna cover traps. That's gonna be soon. We're gonna cover traps in this myth busting. So yeah, so that all of these things are things that any Egyptian, no matter what, would encounter in their life. Like these are all like standard things that could happen to them. They're just kind of stating semi the obvious. So after the Old Kingdom and the Middle Kingdom, they are even more rare, which is weird because like the New Kingdom is usually the area that we have the most text preserved. Like we have so much text. Sorry, I'm saying an S at the end of that, but I realize no one can hear me when I say an S. There is so much textual evidence in the New Kingdom, so I find it very odd and rare that they would not be included. So it kind of shows a downgrade of like they're not offering it as much. But I will say, for those that do exist, they are more severe. It's weird to say that these are standard threats, but like these are things that every Egyptian is going to have to, like, that is the daily life of the Egyptian, is that there are lots of crocodiles, there are lots of hippopotami, there are scorpions, there are snakes. Like these are things that are just like, this sounds like awful, but like in our time and on our day, it would be something that is like, I hope you get in a car crash, like something that is just common that just happens to people. Like, they're not saying anything, like, super mystical or super crazy. Like, that last one has a lot of extra stuff where it's, like, you're gonna lose your position in court and your son is gonna lose his position. Like, it is, like, but, like, those are the same things. Like, it's not really a supernatural thing. It's just, although the one big thing is that, like, this one says, I shall be as him as the crocodile. Like, they're saying that I specifically am coming after you as, like, a crocodile. So, like, these are just protective spells. These are just things that are trying to warn. This is why I don't like the word warning either. I feel like there is no good word for these, because the definition of a warning is I go up to a sign that's at the edge of a cliff and it says, warning, there is a cliff, and I am reading that and I am saying, okay, I have been warned. But if people can't read the sign, then it's not a warning. Which sounds so weird to think about, but like, the ancient Egyptians know at that time that not a lot of people can read. So who is this for? Who is this warning if it is not a tomb robber or somebody who cannot read? Like, that's kind of the weird thing for me. So I don't like using the word warning either. It's like, it is a protective spell. That's really what it is. And yes, so it's a spell. It's asking the gods to look over them, but it's just not specifically asking us. Yeah, it's like, it's a hard thing to kind of conceptualize when you put yourself in the shoes of an ancient Egyptian being like, wait, they couldn't read that. Like, it is weird to think about, like, when you go to tombs and you go to temples in Egypt and you see it covered with text and a little switch just switches in your head and you realize they couldn't read that. It's almost like how you are looking at it now, saying, I know that's words, but I can't read it. And that's like a very daunting thing to kind of walk up and know. It's like going to another country. Sorry, one sec. It's like going to another country and going to, you're not an English speaker, you go to Times Square. Everything is covered in English. So how are you going to read it? Sorry, I'm just checking the chat. Yes, Spooky One, we're going to talk about that as well. Julia, so there are always injuries and there are always like things that occur. But no, like I'll use Tutankhamun as like the biggest example for this, and like there is no written curse in Tutankhamun's tomb. I will say, like, Tutankhamun is not involved in this. There was the idea of a curse with Tutankhamun's tomb came about because Lord Carnarvon, who was the financier of the entire excavation for Howard Carter, died very shortly after the discovery. And people, it's a little contemplated, a little bit debated, but most likely he died because of a mosquito bite that he may have gotten inside the tomb and then became infected. But the funny thing is, then they say, oh, so many people who have been associated with the Tutankhamun excavation died so quickly after. When you actually look at the dates at when those people died, they died many years after. Lord Carnarvon, and I think there was like one other person who died within like a 5-year time period, but like everyone else died so much later. Howard Carter lived many, many years after this, and people will still say that he died because of the curse. And you're like, okay. And so, like, yes and no. Like, no. But it's like there's never any like really big document unless he died from a tomb cave-in, which I've never heard of anything like that. But like that, like, unless something happened immediately after, no, like there's really no evidence that a lot of archaeologists died doing the work in Egypt, at least. I'm not sure about other places, but hi, friend at arms, welcome on in. Sorry, I really have to pee. I'm trying to get through this one, and then I'm gonna take a break. Yeah, 1923. So the it's only, yeah, 1922, or no, 1920. When was the tomb discovered? November 1922. Howard Carter, tuberculosis? Probably. I do not remember. That's a good question. I do not know how Howard Carter died. Okay. Just a couple more of these, and then we will do a little bit more discussion, and then I have to take a quick bathroom break. So after the Old Kingdom and the Middle Kingdom, they become more rare, but the ones that we do find become more severe. So sometimes they evoke the ire of Thoth or the destruction of Sekhmet. There's one example that says, cursed be those who disturb the rest of the pharaoh. They that shall break the seal of this tomb shall meet death by a disease that no doctor can diagnose. I know, Julia, but I have a blood test tomorrow, and I never drink water. I never drink water, so this is I'm like literally the worst, and this is why I have to pee so bad, is because I don't drink a lot of water, and I literally have to do it tomorrow. I also have deep veins, so they always look at me and I'm like, I have deep veins, and they're like, no, you're dehydrated. I'm like, no, I have deep veins, please. I might not have to drink after this because I have to pee so bad. Okay. I thank you, Julia, for myth busting that I am dehydrated. But also I drink so little water every day, so I think I might be dehydrated, but I know that probably they are telling me I'm not. They might just be hamming it up, but I know how little water I drink. So I personally might be dehydrated. I'm sorry. I can't stop laughing. It's just like, I know that I just kind of am. Like, I just know myself. I'm not even joking. This is a random tangent. My mom had these peach drinks. They're just like water, and it tastes like peaches, and it's like 0 calories. There's like absolutely nothing in them, and I started drinking them. I'm like, this is the most delicious thing I've ever tasted. And I looked at her and I said, is this how I'm going to be able to drink water? And I drank like 2 in one day. Like I drank so much of them. Exactly, Matt. Exactly. Yeah, so I know that I don't drink enough water. They might be lying to me and just saying that I have deep veins, but I have been refused once. She literally looked at me. She never pricked me once. She looked at me and she goes, "Come, drink more water and come back tomorrow." And I was like, "What?" So, I digress. Let's finish this. Another warning protective spell that was supposedly placed over the tomb of Amenhotep, son of Hapu. Not a pharaoh, not one of the Amenhoteps, just another, a pretty big, like prominent official. Lose their earthly possessions and honors, be incinerated in a furnace in execration rites, capsize and drown at sea, have no successors, receive no tomb or funerary offerings of their own, and their bodies would decay because they will starve without sustenance and their bones will perish. That's a pretty big one. Thank you, Bob, for all the roses. That one was actually kind of shocking. I was like, wow, that's really big. And then this last one, which is the one that you see here in the image, is located at the National Museum of Scotland. We unfortunately don't know what tomb it was located in. We just know it was at Sheikh Abd al-Qurna, which is like, there's officials and there's important people here, but not like really a pharaoh or any prominent person. This is what the translation of what this text says. "It is to you that I speak. All people who will find this tomb passage, watch out to not take even a pebble from within it outside. If you find this stone, you shall not transgress against it. Indeed, the gods since the time of prey, those who rest in the midst of the mountains gain strength every day, even though their pebbles are dragged away. Look for a place worthy of yourself and rest in it, and do not constrict gods in their own houses, as every man is happy with his place, and every man is glad in his house. As for he who will be sound, beware of forcefully removing the stone from its place. As for he who covers it in his place, great lords of the West will reproach him very, 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 very much." And it does supposedly have all of those varies at the end. This is what the National Museum of Scotland, they actually translated it to say that. And there are ways of doing it with that, but yeah. So that's a very interesting curse of itself, because it really does not describe what the person is what's going to happen to the person. They're just like, don't do it. Just don't take it. Like, the great lords of the West are obviously like so prominent that if you read that and you said, "Oh God, he's gonna be reproached. He's gonna be reproached." That's it. So besides some of these statements that do appear in some tombs, this is the extent. Like, and also the statement that pharaohs put these is also not really true. That's kind of one of the bigger misnomers of this myth itself. These are just like word of mouth and like superstitions and like of like fear. Like, that is what the way that curses are talked about now, is that like it's a thing that you have to fear from. And we know that the ancient Egyptians accepted that their bodies had to be protected for their tomb to go into the afterlife, but so it makes sense. The curse theory makes sense for them, but are we actually like cursing somebody, or are we just using this as a protective spell? Are we trying to prove to the gods that we need this, that like the gods need to see that you're trying to protect your tomb? Like, it's a little bit more nuanced than I think just the statement that it is. Is there a way non-experts can discern the importance of the tomb's subject from their time? Are you saying, like... You're totally not out of line. I'm just trying to get what you're saying. So are you saying that, like, can you use the size and decoration of a tomb to figure out who, if they were really, like, famous or something? Hi, Tanita. Welcome on in. We're doing a little bit of a lecture. I just took a quick break, so we're getting ready to get into the next one. Oh, like a pharaoh versus a general person. It depends on the time period, but yes, most of the time you can. Sometimes the tombs get very, the tombs of pharaohs get very regular. Like they're always, like famous, but like figuring out what kind of, figuring out like what class they're in is a little bit easier, but it does depend on the time period. So if we're talking Old Kingdom, pharaohs get pyramids. Not every pharaoh got a pyramid. Pharaohs get pyramids. They have the money, they have the resources, they get a pyramid. Like, that's easy. Royal, like, if you go into a mastaba and you see how big the mastaba is, yes, there's a higher chance that that person is a closer official, is a prince, is a relative of the king. That's always possible. Middle Kingdom, it's a little bit harder. You're kind of in between pyramids and awesome mastabas. New Kingdom, you get like New Kingdom, it's harder. Almost all of the pharaohs are concentrated into one area, so it's, if you're in the Valley of the Kings, more than likely it's a pharaoh. There are a couple that are not pharaohs, but more than likely it's a pharaoh's tomb. And then when you go outside in other places, there are very elaborate tombs, and then there are very small tombs. So in some ways it is, I would say, just to distinguish between a pharaoh and a non-pharaoh, yes. Everything else, sometimes no. Thank you so much, Jagmon Savage, for the follow. Welcome on in. But yeah, it's, if you're trying to distinguish between, not yet 3D Prime. We're not going to cover the cats or the fertilizer. We are going to cover Mumia. Mumia is at the end, but we are going to cover Mumia. The cats and the fertilizer are technically true, so those are not, I'm not qualifying as myths. Mumia is one of the in the middle, where it's inaccurate, but it is technically true. The statement is inaccurate, but it is technically based on truth. But yeah, we're not going to cover I do want to do a whole, I think that would be a good lecture of all the weird things people did with mummies. I think that would be a really good one. Any other questions before we move on? I'm very excited for, I was very excited for this one. The next one I'm also pretty excited for. Okay. So, has anyone heard the statement that ancient Egyptian tombs were booby-trapped? Because I'm sure you have. This is a standard one. It comes from way too many movies and TV shows. So, here's the question. Were ancient Egyptian tombs booby-trapped? No, it's a myth. There are some exceptions, and we will talk about them. Very good question, Vev. That is one of the things that we're gonna talk about. Absolutely. Matt, bring that up at the end of this section, and I will answer that one for you. So, Egyptian tombs were booby-trapped. So, I'm sure many of you guys have seen a lot of Indiana Jones, a lot of Lara Croft, The Librarian, lots of stuff of tombs and temples and ancient structures filled with booby traps that were meant to injure, were meant to capture or trap or kill any sort of invader into that sacred space. Thank you so much, Output Logic, for the follow. Welcome on in. So, unfortunately, this does imply a lot of different things, like, about ancient cultures, to essentially say that they have this conniving mind, that they would want to hurt anyone who disturbs their sacred spaces. But obviously, we just talked about the potential of tomb curses, so maybe it's not that crazy to think about. But in addition, this also adds to the thought that the ancients were extremely smart and capable engineers who were not only able to design these booby traps, but to design them to last thousands of years, like Vev mentions. I can't believe that there are whenever I see like booby traps specifically in like movies that have like rope or fabric or like some sort of like organic material, I'm like, that's definitely not lasting 100 yet let alone thousands of years. I love the Librarian movies. I have yet to watch the series, but I loved my mother introduced me to the Librarian movies because she loves Noah Wyle from ER. Yeah, so it's like, it is kind of crazy to think about that, like, this is giving, like, they're putting a lot on the ancient Egyptians and any other ancient culture and stuff, like, that, like, they're putting a lot on them, that they are both, like, really, really smart and also very conniving in this way to, like, purposely want to hurt people in the future, sort of. So the first thing I wanted to do is I've always wondered where the term booby trap comes from. So let's talk about where the term booby trap comes from. For those who don't know, a booby trap is a device or setup that is intended to kill, harm, or surprise a human or another animal. It comes from the Spanish word bobo, which translates as stupid, naive, daft, a simple fool, an idiot, a clown, a funny man, or one who is easily cheated. So, the slang of bobo, or bubby, translates to dunce. And then, around 1590, a word appeared in the English language as booby, meaning stupid person or slow bird. And this is coming from the seabird called a booby. And in this case, this is a blue-footed booby. And it's mainly because these birds have very large flat wing spans, but they are clumsy and slow and makes them very easy to catch. A blue-footed booby. Although it is, the funny thing is that I'm pretty sure the bird is spelled B-O-O-B-I-E, but booby traps are always spelled B-O-O-B-Y. Spooky one, we are specifically talking about ancient Egyptian booby traps, because I just don't know a lot about other cultures. I was, in a little bit of my research, I did see that there appeared to be some things appearing in other ancient cultures, like structures, but we're only really talking about Egypt here. So I don't really know if booby traps were possibilities in other places, but for Egypt, not so much. Okay, so the term as booby trap in all, essentially originally applied to like schoolboy pranks, but it took a much more serious connotation during World War I. One of the earliest times we have the word referenced is in 1839 in a news story in the Times. And unfortunately, I knew this was going to get sad, and it has a very sad backstory as to like what booby traps are. A lot of booby traps are used during wartime, especially during the Vietnam War. This is like a whole thing about mines. Mines are like considered a booby trap because it's meant to kind of it's meant to kind of like be hidden and scare you, but also harm you. And so they've been used in many different wartime efforts, like the Troubles and then in the Middle East and in terrorist activity. Like, they have been used a lot. And what I find so ironic and strange is the entire Wikipedia about booby traps mentions nothing of booby traps anytime earlier than the 1890s, but it also doesn't mention it in any ancient structure and doesn't even reference that booby traps are used in fiction so much. Like, usually I find Wikipedia pages, like, obviously, like, nowadays Wikipedia is becoming a little bit more trustworthy. It usually has a lot of different sources. I was very surprised that they didn't have at least one section referencing the use of booby traps in, like, TV and film, but as a more like the fictionalized version of these booby traps. Like, I was actually very surprised that there was no reference to it at all in this Wikipedia page. And so, is it spelled with a B, with a Y? I always thought it was spelled with an IE, but yes, okay, apparently it is spelled that way too. But yeah, so there are other things that we know as like wartime booby traps. I was just very surprised it didn't mention anything. It didn't even, honestly, the booby traps there was no mention of those And I guess it's just because they're really looking at the term booby trap, and like anything that they're like the Romans would have done or any sort of ancient culture would not be considered a booby trap. I don't know. I'm not a boobyologist. Okay, so let's debunk the booby traps. And it's actually not as easy to debunk as you might think. If we look at what the definition of a booby trap, we're getting there, Julia. There is no definite indication on how we're looking at it. But if we consider that a booby trap is just essentially a preventative measure to stop people from getting in or stop people from stealing things from tombs and pyramids, there actually are aspects of that included in some structures, but they aren't really the things that you see in movies. So there are things that are like preventative measures to stop tomb robbers, but they aren't the same things that you see like in the movies. And we'll go over a couple examples of them. So when you look at the earliest structures like the pyramids, after the pyramid was filled with the pharaoh and all of his different belongings, they would put in huge pieces of granite to block the entrances of these chambers. I have now seen that there is a theory with the Great Pyramid of Giza that there may have been, I'm trying to figure out the way to phrase this, there may have been a trigger system. It's very much theorized. There's no really good evidence, but I was reading a little bit of it. I didn't read enough about it to include it in this, but I did see something that at least for just this pyramid, but it would still be the large granite blocks falling, that there may have been more of a trigger system or something that is not just placing all of the big granite blocks to block off the area. I have to look into that one a little bit more because I wasn't finding as much information as I wanted to kind of include it. Yes, so Vev, so that's where I'm like, there are no active components of a booby trap found in ancient Egyptian tombs, but there are these preventative measures that I wanted to talk about at least. Not really sand cave-ins. No, I haven't found any evidence of that. The false chamber spooky one, yes. So, this is one of the examples of like all of these stones like sliding down and blocking the entrance into the Grand Gallery of the Great Pyramid of Giza. And then in a Middle Kingdom pyramid, there is evidence that there was a chamber to the main burial place. It was sealed with granite. It was made to look like it was just part of the wall. Like you really could not see the difference of like where the actual entrance was. But further down the hall, they left a huge amount of debris. Oh, we get a new raid!
Lord of the Crown, King of the South
and North, Son of Ray. Son of Ray. Welcome on in, Professor Knapp. Not a professor, but you're a professor. Not a professor. Welcome on in, Raiders. Sorry, temporarily stop the lecture. Welcome on in, everyone. If you guys don't know what this sound is, this is the actual trumpet of Tutankhamun that was played on live radio before the second trumpet, because the first trumpet completely disintegrated when somebody touched it. But welcome on in, Not a Professor Knapp. My name is MelissainDeNile. I'm in denial in more ways than one, and I'm an Egyptologist, archaeologist, and streamer. So welcome on in. We are doing a lecture today. We are myth busting all these different very popular myths in ancient Egypt, and right now we're talking about, were there actually booby traps in ancient Egyptian tombs? And so far it is being proven a myth. But we are talking about a little bit more of the preventive measures that you do see. So we were talking about big sliding pieces of granite rocks. In Middle Kingdom pyramids, there also was indication that there was sorry, I want to give you a shout out. I can spell it all right. second. I can't talk. I can't talk and type at the same time sometimes. Especially with this new keyboard, which I'm still honestly getting used to. If I can spell professor. I know I have to drink my water. Let me do this. I know I have to drink my water. Also, it's empty. Oh, you were playing Time Guesser? Were you playing Time Guesser the entire stream? Because we love Time Guesser over here. I'm very good. I'm very good at Time Guesser. Give Professor Nap a follow. Oh, I love Time Guesser. We failed on the daily one this morning, though, because we said somewhere was Canada and not New Zealand. But we did get a perfect score, which was great. I love that one. But yeah, welcome on in. Thank you for bringing over your raid. Feel free to go raid and dash if you're sleepy. I need to go pee or anything like that. Okay, back to the lecture. So, the Middle Kingdom Pyramid has a perfectly hidden entrance to the burial chamber that has been like perfectly sealed with the granite. Looks like just a normal part of the wall. And then on the other side of the hallway, they have left debris and essentially looking like an entrance was there. And so they have used this as a distraction kind of thing. So we do have like evidence of like them deliberately trying to like distract or like trick like tomb robbers. Then, when you get into the tombs of the pharaohs in the New Kingdom, you do get these things called a well shaft. So you can see here, there's the entry passage, and you come in, and there's this very deep, like shaft. And the key thing about this, it looks very weird when you're looking at like the full map of a tomb, but essentially this was a distraction to tomb robbers. Right here, this is my own picture from one of the tombs in the Valley of the Kings. This is the well shaft. We're actually on a little bridge that kind of goes along the well shaft. And it's really, really hard to see, but you can see this wall. This wall, which would have been the like opposite wall of the well shaft, is fully painted and plastered. The entire entrance on the other side of the well shaft is plastered. And so, you seemingly, you would come down this entry passage, you'd take down whatever wall is there, and then suddenly, oh my god, it just goes straight down. It's obviously not the same thing as like, remember Indy, like he tries to swing over the thing and there's like arrows at the bottom. It's not that type of like booby trap. It's just there's a giant hole, and you look and the rest of the room is flat. It's all decorated. It's fine. There's no other entrance. And so some tomb robbers might say, ah, dang it, it's an unfinished tomb. Or we got to go down there, and then you got to figure out a way to get down there to get everything. So this is essentially the only kind of misdirection thing that you see in the New Kingdom. And you only see this in Pharaoh's tombs. There are no such, well shafts do not exist in, and I also will say this, Pharaoh's tombs in the Valley of the Kings. You do not see these in Queen's tombs in the Valley of the Queens. You do not see these in any other Theban tomb. This is only for pharaohs. Because pharaohs' tombs in the Valley of the Kings usually have a very standard design. Now, here's the thing. I say these are not these are not booby traps in that they are not very actively like trying to injure people, trying to kill people, trying to like capture them or anything like that. But these are these hiding tactics. These are these misdirections, these ways to try to make sure that their tombs are safe. They're protective, similar to the curses that we looked at. The problem with this is, which this honestly should have been a separate myth, but I've talked about this so often so that I don't think it's as like important, is that the tombs, ancient Egyptian tombs, and this includes pyramids, this includes tombs in the Valley of the Kings, most of these tombs are looted by the people who helped design and build them within a couple months to a couple years after the tomb is sealed. They are looted by the people who know all the secrets, who know all the misdirections, who know that when they come down here to this well shaft, that they just have to bust open that wall on the other side, and they will get into the tomb. So it does seem kind of stupid that the pharaohs continuously did this, but for the most part, Vev, we don't 100% know the identity, but we know based on, honestly, probably don't know how to read curses, to be honest, Spooky One. We don't know the exact identities of these looters, but this is something that we can look at archaeologically because we can see items that, and this is not the best, unfortunately, for like Old Kingdom and pyramids and stuff, but you can find evidence of things that are, oh, Wombat, that's another one we're gonna cover. You guys are just bringing up all the myths. Actually, well, I don't cover that one specifically, but I cover something similar to that. I didn't think about that myth. I didn't think about that one. I didn't include that one. But we can talk about that. When we talk about the other one that I'm thinking of, we'll talk about that. Because I forgot that is kind of something that comes up. So, yes, they most likely, there's no real evidence that they've ever killed, like, the builders of a tomb. We know in some cases, especially when we looks at the, especially when you look at the Valley of the Kings, we have court records of looters being charged after they've essentially, you can see that they have been looting within a couple months after the pharaoh has died and has been buried. And we have some court records that date to the New Kingdom that tell us this. And so this is one of the instances where we kind of make assumptions and we kind of backdate these assumptions based on other evidence of like objects found in tombs that don't make sense, and have that date later, like date after the pharaoh, and you're like, well, how did that get in here? And you realize, oh, well, a looter within the next 100 years or something came in and dropped something and left something there. Probably death, in some cases if you were caught. Not good. That's one of the things, one of our upcoming lectures I want to give is I want to give a lecture on crime and punishment in ancient Egypt. It's not something that I know much about, but although I know a little bit more about it after I did all the research on the harem conspiracy. So death, but specifically in some cases, burning. So either burning alive or being killed and then burned, because that means that you're dead to the afterlife as well, because there's no human remains. But depending on how bad your crime is, you might be offered to kill yourself, and that's somehow better, which is crazy to think about, because then you could actually like still be mummified and still have a potentially okay afterlife. So that's at least New Kingdom standards, but something similar to it. That would be funny, 3D promo. Yeah, I know about the emperors in China's tomb. It's one of the things I'm super interested. Like, I love that. I watched so many documentaries about that when I was younger. Involved making undead monsters with. No, not as much. Not really. Sorry, I'm all stuffed up. I forgot to tell you my event went yesterday. I had to drive through pouring rain, but then it actually was very nice. Ugh. That is another option, friend at arms. Absolutely. So, well, it's a possibility. Yeah, cremation is bad for the ancient Egyptians, for sure. It's definitely a possibility, but the other thing is that the entrance should be sealed. So, like, there should be a sealed door at the front, or it's been hidden. Especially the tombs in the Valley of the Kings were not really open to people. They weren't really, in other tombs that they would have chapels that would be open. In this case, these are not really open to chapels, because the chapel for New Kingdom pharaohs, the chapel is their mortuary temple, which is located much closer to everything else. And so it can, and the well shafts are now, when they were discovered, when these tombs were discovered, mostly open, the well shafts were full of items from all eras of time past when it was made, because of the floods that came into it. But the doors, they should have been sealed, so that it wasn't, I won't say the primary use of a well shaft was for that reason. Okay. Very welcome, friend at arms. I hadn't heard about that, but that it makes, I feel like, again, that's like one of those myths. It actually kind of makes sense, and then when you really think about it, you're like, wait, no, that actually doesn't make sense. Okay, so that is it for booby traps. This is the other one that we're going to talk about. Was that wombat? Did you say that? Yeah, wombat. Well, we'll briefly talk about that one when we talk about this one. But I don't know if anyone's heard this one before, that servants were sacrificed to be buried with the pharaoh. And this is a myth, but only sort of. And so we're going to talk about it. But it is kind of yes, but it is also kind of no. And to be honest, I just really wanted to talk about this because I didn't know anything about this. I knew the basics, but I did not know as much about this. Yes, Matt. Oh yes, Matt. What was your earlier question again? I'm so sorry. I don't know. What was your earlier question? Oh, the quickest thing on how Egyptian pharaohs had Greek ancestry. This is the quickest way that I can do this. Very, very late period in Egypt. Egypt keeps getting invaded by Assyrians twice, and then eventually by Persians. And so, it's Assyrians, and then it's Nubians, and then it's Assyrians, and then it's Persians. And so the entirety of Egypt is conquered by the Persians. There are still obviously Egyptians living there, and the Persians were pretty chill with them still, like, living like Egyptians. They didn't really try to assimilate them at all. And then Alexander the Great comes in, and he takes over the Persian Empire, and thus takes over Egypt along with it. Then he goes all the way out to Afghanistan, India, and he dies. And Alexander the Great, he was so great that all of his Hyksos is way earlier than this. This is all at the very, very end. Hyksos is third intermediate period. Or second intermediate period. Second intermediate period, I apologize. They are not Greek, they are Canaanite. So Alexander the Great is like, he dies, and none of his generals think that any one of them can rule the entire empire, so they split it in a million little pieces. And so the Ptolemies, a guy named Ptolemy, who was a Macedonian / Greek general, he gets Egypt, and he then starts to rule Egypt, and then he rules Egypt for 300 years, with every single pharaoh being named Ptolemy, and all of the wives and daughters and mothers all either being named Cleopatra, Berenice, also spelled Bernice, and Arsinoe. And that is then how Cleopatra VII is Greek. She is a descendant of that family, and the family actually copied the ancient Egyptians and married within their family. So they are most likely very pure. I don't like using the word pure. So Ptolemy the First was a general of Alexander the Great. I know Bernice, I hate it, but I always say it Bernice like it's supposed to be in Greek, but it is literally Bernice. That's how it's spelled. It's not with a K, but I always pronounce it Bernice because I hate saying Bernice. Hi Tuna, welcome on in. But yeah, so that is how the last rulers, so like when you really look at it, the last like Egyptian rulers is like a good 500 to 600 to 700 years before the end of the Egyptian empire, sort of. Yeah. That's the quickest answer I can give. I'm pretty good at that answer because I've gotten that question so many times. Okay, so were servants actually sacrificed to be buried with their pharaoh? And the answer is yes, but only for a very, very small time period in ancient Egypt. This is not a practice that was done in the vast, vast majority. Like, this is like 1% of ancient Egyptian history. This was done. And honestly, I just wanted to talk about it. I wanted to do more research on it, so that's why I included it here, because I do occasionally see this statement kind of floating around. So the term that we're going to use is called retainer sacrifices. And this is a type of human sacrifice in which the pharaohs and occasionally other high court nobility would have their servants killed after the pharaoh's death to continue to serve him in the afterlife. The only really thing that I need to debunk of this statement is that this occurs throughout all ancient Egyptian history, which is not true. And this only occurs in the first dynasty, just the first. So this is around 3100 BCE to about 2900 BCE, around 200 years of stuff. And that's pretty much it. So let's just use this as a teaching moment, because I only really knew the basics and I wanted to know more. So this is what it was like in the first dynasty. So the images that you see here are two small slabs dating to the first dynasty. The first one on the left is from Saqqara, concerning King Jer. And then the one on the right is from Abydos, concerning King Aha. Both of these depict a seated person. This, you can see this is blown up here. Both of these depict a seated person who is directing a pointed instrument to the throat of chest of another person who is kind of kneeling backwards. Most likely with their arms tied behind their back. Both arms are kind of behind them. Now, multiple Egyptologists have predicted that this is an image of this human sacrifice. Oddly enough, there are a couple Egyptologists and also a couple non-Egyptologists who believe that this is not human sacrifice, but this is actually a tracheostomy being performed. Which, I found a random paper from some medical journal that said it, and I was like, come on, people. Like, what are you talking about? But then I also did see that an Egyptologist actually agreed with them. So these are his arms. These are his arms behind him, and this is his legs, and then this is the pointed instrument. He's facing this way. It's hard to tell, but yeah, this guy is holding this instrument, and he's hitting him in the chest, and these are his legs are kneeling, and his arms are behind him. And the same thing with this guy. His arms are behind him, he's kneeling, and this guy is holding something. Yeah, big tuna. So here's my thing about this, because I didn't do enough research I didn't read the paper of why they think it's a tracheostomy. This piece, it's difficult to say, because the only other part of this is this thing on the side, which is sort of what this is. It's a flag, or a standard is what it's called. And it has like a symbol at the top. But when you look at the rest of this image, the one on the left, the context makes no sense, because what I see here, so on here on the left is a serek, which is an early version of a cartouche, which is a indication of the king's name. So this is a serek. It also possibly is depicting a palace, because we know that the serek was made within a serek was made to look like yeah, so this guy's arms are to the front and this guy's arms are to the back. No, these are not fully formed hieroglyphs. Absolutely not. Yeah, you are correct. So there are certain symbols in here that look like they are, but it's a very it is much more pictographic. It is much more very little basic things. In my opinion, this looks like a mummy being brought to a palace. This, in later Egyptian, no, because when you look at this guy, he's got 2 arms. This one is harder to tell, but this one, when you see the 2 oh my god, I can't speak. The 2 arms with the little hands. He's going, I can't picture it, but he's going like this. Hi, Storm. What birds were popular? Every goddamn bird. Ducks, goose, falcons, vultures. Yeah, those are pretty much. I'm telling you, literally, there are so many images of different ducks. So many. Chicks, there's so many. Ibis, yes, I forgot the ibis. There's so many. Yeah, there's really like so many. Heron, yeah, in some images there's like a heron. I don't think a pelican. I'd have to look into it deeper, but I don't think I've ever seen a pelican. But yeah, so I am a little bit more with sacrifice, because if this is literally a, if you can find an image of an ancient Egyptian pelican, Steve, or Seven, I would love that. Because I feel like I've never seen one before, but I might be wrong. I have no idea. I don't think I've seen a pelican. But I would really love to find one if there has been one. I don't know where pelicans are native to. I don't really think they're native. There's a poem called Pelican's Wee that takes place on the Nile. Okay, Seven, if you're not part of the Discord, get a part of the Discord so you can send it to me, because I want to know. Yeah, so there is some sort of other stuff. Not really that we know of. Baby bat. Very good question. Alex! Ah! Oh. Are those pelicans? Huh. You know, I feel like I have seen that, and I just didn't think that they were a pelican. But that is actually, I think, a pelican. Seven, you might be right. So, extinct in Egypt, yes. There are lots of animals that were not, that used to live in Egypt, but then were not in Egypt anymore, but they are not extinct. And so that's why I didn't say it like that. But you know, you're right, Alex. That definitely is a pelican. Which image? The one that Alex linked? I cannot... I can't sight read, unfortunately. I can see a few things that I recognize, but I unfortunately cannot sight read on cue. I'd have to look it up. So yeah, so there are animals that did not live in Egypt. Like in the very early time in Egypt, it was more like a savanna. It was more wet. There were elephants and giraffes and lions and lots of other creatures. And then they migrated more south when it became more desert. Sorry, my nose is still stuffed up. Probably eating them. That's probably a guy harvesting eggs. Or maybe even, they might even be, what is the word? They might even be domesticated, so they might be eating the eggs. Yeah, I have never heard of that goddess either, so I'm gonna have to look her up. She must be a really rare goddess. Thank you, Seven. Yeah, she's the ancient Egyptian goddess of pelicans. I have never heard of her, which is why this Wikipedia is so short. Sorry. There's not even a picture of her. Isn't that crazy? There's no picture of her. It's literally just that picture of them being depicted in a tomb. That's very interesting. Thanks, Seven. Okay. sorry. Back to the sacrifice servants. So, the everything else on this little piece indicates something to do with the king, and indicates something royal. And like this, I literally think might be a funerary procession, and that is why this has possibly been interpreted as this this sacrifice. But again, some people apparently think it's tracheostomy, so I will look into that more and bring up whatever they're talking about. The Pelican Project. It is very tempting. I've been wanting to do it with cats for a while, actually, and some other animals. But I might have to do the Pelican Project. The different beards, no. Ancient Egyptians are usually very clean shaven. The king usually has a fake beard that he wears as a symbol of his authority, like some of the gods, but otherwise not much. Okay. So, as far as we know, when you look at the ancient Egyptians' belief in the afterlife they believed that the afterlife was exactly like real life, but it was in a place with the gods. And so you still had to do everything that you wanted to do. You had to work, you had to sleep, you had to eat, you had to talk, you had to drink, you had to do everything. And so this also depends on your social hierarchy. If in your life you were of a very high social status, then people were doing stuff for you. Then when you went to the afterlife, you also weren't. You weren't as much. I'm in love. That is the cutest little poem I've ever read in my life. Oh my god. It is so cute. It's so funny. I've never heard of that before. I'm gonna have to look that up later. That's actually really cute. Yeah, 3D Prema. That is something that they would do sometimes to correspond with the text, because the text is using pictograms, and not all the time, but a lot of the text looks like it. So we know that the ancient Egyptians knew that they had to work and they had to do all of those things. But if you were of a certain social status, then you didn't have to work. But you had to have somebody work for you. You had to kind of have that accessibility as you did when you were alive. Now, why would Egyptians want to conduct these retainer sacrifices? Let's look at it, put it in the perspective. Everyone step their feet into all the different types of Egyptians and try to think about this a little bit clearly. For the pharaohs and the nobles perspective, they wanted to enjoy the exact same type of lifestyle that they had after death, that they had during life. That's what they wanted. And they wanted to continue their social hierarchy, which was based on being served by others. This was also a way to help communicate the idea that the state was literally worth dying for. No, it sounds a very cute poem. I can't wait to look at it a little bit deeper. I want to see if I can find one with images so I can see what it looks like. Now, for those who are actually getting sacrificed, they viewed the pharaoh as a living god, usually as the god Horus. And when a pharaoh dies, he becomes the god Osiris. Now, there was one possibility that those who were sacrificed might have gotten a raise in status and wealth in the afterlife. Who knows? Maybe even their family that was still alive would have gotten that boost in society. It's a possibility as well. There's also this might imply that they agreed to be sacrificed to raise their social status in the afterlife. And they may have viewed this as a surefire way to reach eternal life. But again, these are really hard concepts that we can't really discern just by archaeology and burial practices. But these are all kind of possibilities. We kind of just put it in our mind that these are all different options and stuff. Yeah, a lot of times you are designing your tomb, you're looking at it how you want your life to be in the afterlife. Absolutely. It's whatever you believe in, Vev. In some cases, Vev, yeah, that thought is not really gone. For how long did they have to plan to go to the afterlife? For some people, like pharaohs, you started building your tomb as soon as it was accessible to you. Because if the tomb takes you, which is why all 3 of the pyramids of Giza were not finished by the time the pharaoh died. Literally, each of their sons had to continue finishing it to build it. Yeah, Helia, I think that's definitely a possibility. That, like, it not only would help them in the afterlife, but I think there's a possibility that they could have helped their current living family to raise either in social status or getting some sort of compensation. I think that's another possibility. We don't have any direct evidence of that, but that is an option. Oh, how many rations did you have to put in? Oh, so not that much, because many people couldn't afford it. If you're very, very wealthy, you'd put a shit ton in. But the other option is that you were supposed to be getting offerings from your living relatives to continue to sustain you in the afterlife. And that is why you get decorations of offering formulas, you get text of offering formulas, you get decorations of the deceased sitting in front of an offering table, you get offering stela, which have the deceased sitting in front of the offering table with the family member that's still living giving the options to them. And then while you actually have your family member bringing you fresh offerings every day, every week, or whatever, you have all of these options which are going to give you all of those things in the afterlife. So you had to have it forever. But if you had a tomb and it was all painted on the walls, then those are forever. You would have those offering spells would be read by priests, and they would always be continuous. It's why offering spells say an offering that the king gave, and then it blanks a god. But it's why it says the king. It does not say the name of a specific king, because it is meant to be everlasting. It is meant to cover all of your basis, so that you don't have to know the name of the king. But that king is giving it to you. He is. He always is. And that god and that king, they are always giving you that offering. But it's every king. So it should last forever. But there are other options of getting other sustenance from it. Okay. So, the graves around the royal tombs of the First Dynasty often contain remains that have been interpreted as harem members. And just so everyone knows, harem does not mean actually harem, and means royal women associated with the family. There also could be minor palace members, members of court, people with dwarfism, and even dogs. So many of these are denoted with tiny little stela, or little rocks, like you see here, essentially tombstones, that have their name on it. And I have quite a few. I think I have 5 or 6. These are just 2 of them. The other 2 on here, these are people. These look like women. So these are people that we interpret as being a retainer sacrifice for these pharaohs. These are 2 of the different dogs. The dogs do have names. This is Eid, or Idge. Idge? Yeah. Idge. And then this is Hemut, which means like wife, specifically, if you're looking at it as a human name, but it's just Hemet. Sorry, Hemet. Hemet? Ooh, I can't remember. Thank you so much for the follow. But yeah, so dogs and humans have all been included in these tombs. So let's talk about some numbers, because some of these are a little impressive. God, why am I so congested? I'm talking too much. Oh my God, excuse me. That was nasty. Oh my goodness. Thank you for the corn. It's corn. Okay. Excuse me. That was so gross. Big Tuna Neil, thank you for the follow. Yes, thank you, Alex. Harem in ancient Egypt does not mean the same thing that it does in more Muslim royalty and Muslim like higher class, where you say essentially that like harems in those areas are more restrictive and the women can't leave. Egypt, it's not the same thing. In Egyptian context, it's just the domestic space reserved for women of the royal family, and that includes like the mother and the sisters of the pharaoh, but also his wives, also his younger children, and daughters and things like that. So the numbers that we're going to talk about for some of these specific pharaohs and high officials. Oh, sorry, excuse me. A lot of these sources are slightly contradicting each other, probably because a lot of these sites were excavated a long time ago, like in the late 1800s, and records are not great. So these are all kind of estimates. This is a huge site out in Abydos, and we're going to look at quite a few of these. But so for King Aha, this is one of his tombs here. In this context, it is tomb B10, B15, and B19. And then B14, this one over here, is possibly his wife's tomb. But all of these are possibly associated with his as well. We know we have 35 retainer sacrifices inside his tomb, and there are 12 in 3 surrounding tombs enclosed in his funerary enclosure. Then let's go to King Jer. Thank you so much for the 6 roses, April. Has someone got a job building a tomb? That's a good question. They paid it via free labor. It's not free labor, obviously. But there's no money, remember? Like, they're not paying anybody to do anything. And in some cases, they probably only paid them via, like, again, what we were talking about with the pyramids, with the words, housing and food. And so you essentially probably would just work your way up. This is also so early that, like, I don't even know if architects sort of existed. I mean, they had to, obviously, but yeah, beard, board, and beef. Yeah. So they would be paid starm in beer. Oh, no, sorry. They would be paid in grain. So they'd be paid in either barley or emmer, which are the 2 main grains that the ancient Egyptians grew. And then that individual person would then take their grain to a brewer or to a baker to get it made and then bring it back. And so that's how you get paid. And potentially, we talked about this with the pyramid builders a little bit earlier, is that we know that the pyramid builders got beef and fish. And so potentially they were getting a better nutritional diet because they were working for the pharaoh, and they've moved to work for the pharaoh out of this town, than they would have been at home if they were just farmers or any other sort of laborer. This time period, it's really hard to kind of say. Zulu, we already went over that one. It is not. We literally just went over that. That was one of the earlier ones we did. But the Orion correlation theory, you can look it up. It is not true. It is a fringe theory that branches onto a larger conspiracy theory about the pyramids being older than they actually are. No problem. You can come back and you can watch the VOD, but we covered that one a little bit more in detail. So this is the tomb of King Jair, who is King Aha's son, and he had 318 retainer sacrifices buried inside of his tomb, and 269 buried in the enclosure surrounding his tomb. There also may have been another 200 as well, according to some records. Then we have the King Jet, who is here on the left. Yes. King Jet had 174 retainers in his tomb at Abydos and 62 at his tomb in Saqqara. He had another tomb where he wasn't even buried, but he had other retainers buried there as well. Then on the right here is the tomb of King Den, and he had about 230 located in his tombs. And you can see here, it is all of these subsidiary burials. All of these would have contained these people. And then the last one I talk about is the King Ka'a. And this helps illustrate the decline of these retainer sacrifices, as there was only 30 retainer sacrifices after his death found in his tomb, which is much, much smaller. We're going to talk about that a little bit, Starm. Sorry, I'm scrolling back to see something. Vev, that would be a very interesting thing to figure out, but I don't know if that happened. But that's a very interesting kind of thought of like applying for the job, sort of, which I think would be really interesting. Okay, so to kind of answer Storm's question, and this is a very select study. Oh my goodness, April, thank you so much for the 10 roses. Thank you so much. 2 authors have examined 44 skulls from the funerary complex of King Jair to look at the demographics of those sacrificed retainers. I don't believe they actually talked about how they died, but it's not... I don't think we are mostly assuming these are like ritualistic. Like, they might have been done by a priest because it is meant to be for the afterlife, but I don't think we really have as much evidence of that. I could see it happening, but it's really hard to kind of determine that. So what these 2 authors determined is that those retainer sacrifices that were buried outside of the tomb enjoyed better health than those inside the tomb. And this can be interpreted 2 different ways. First, those who are buried outside of the tomb were believed to have enjoyed better health because they were wealthier and then had better nutritional standards. That's one option. Then there's the option that those who are buried inside the tomb could not afford to take care of their illness and may have been essentially included because they were ill inside the tomb. 2 very weird possibilities. And the other, I'm going to throw one out there, is that there's a possibility, because this is something that you see later in ancient Egyptian history, that the ones that are outside of the tomb were not retainer sacrifices, but were high officials who wanted to be buried near their pharaoh, because that is extremely common in the Old Kingdom. Yeah, possibly something like that, Alex. I'm kind of leaning towards that the ones that are on the outside are just people who want to be buried near the pharaoh, but I would have to look into it if we can determine that like the entire structure was built at the same time, or if like some structures were built at different times. This is like a really hard kind of thing to figure out because the tombs are not really in great condition in comparison to like mastabas of the Old Kingdom and stuff. But yeah, so it's a little bit hard to determine, but no matter what, it seems that these two groups did not really share the same social status. In addition, the 12 that were found surrounding the tomb of Aha were identified to be all male and around 20 years of age. This is suggested that due to their gender and their youth, and how they were buried in straight rows, that they may have been a military guard buried with a king to protect him in the afterlife, and that they were buried for that specific reason. Whether or not they actually were military before in real life, it's a little hard to say. And I will also say, in the case of those sacrificed and buried with King Jair, the vast majority were female, and they may have been considered as the king's subsidiary wives, concubines, relatives, or maidservants. So it does depend on these pharaohs. Studies have been taken to kind of tell us who they might have been, but it always seems to kind of depend between them. So I will also mention that some Egyptologists dispute the authenticity of retainer sacrifices, and this is usually due to less than substantial evidence, because these tombs are, if not the oldest tombs in Egypt, they have all been looted in antiquity, they have been looted in modern times, they have been excavated improperly, which has hindered, why does Momibot has a typo? Well, I keep it that way because we also keep that up for guest lectures. Wait, sorry. I'm not listening. Oh. God dang it. Put that in the Discord and I'll fix it. Forgot. Somebody may have told me that and I forgot to fix it a long time ago. It is missing a word. It needs to say when we. Okay. I've lost my train of thought. So yeah, so some people don't believe that these are retainer sacrifices because they potentially could be people that are just buried, have been buried after to be buried close to the king. But one of the biggest indicators that we still do have retainer sacrifices is that individuals that were buried in shared grave sites appeared to be buried simultaneously to each other rather than at different times, which would imply that it was a shared grave that was that it was a shared grave and they were all buried at the same time, which, unless it's a plague, it makes more sense that they would all be ritually sacrificed at the same time and then they would all be buried at the same time. Now, why is there a dwindling of retainer sacrifices? One theory points out that the retainer sacrifices of the pharaohs after the first dynasty essentially were not convinced at the immediate need to die in order to serve their leader in the next life. And it said that they could serve the pharaoh after they died whenever that time came. And essentially, what this implies is that a lot of the people who were sacrificed in the first dynasty chose to be sacrificed, like volunteered, and that after the first dynasty, after you get these pharaohs that are uniting all of Egypt, and everything is a little bit more stable than it was before, and you see kind of the power of the pharaohs, that they can say, hey man, I can help you in the afterlife, just don't kill me when you die. I can help you after I die. Another problem is that they eventually invent Shabti figures, which you can see here on the screen. And these are servant statues that could replace the need for sacrifice altogether. These Shabti figurines would carry on the tasks on behalf of the deceased in the afterlife with use of the Shabti spell. So while this is not necessarily a myth, if you do hear anybody talking about this statement while talking about anything outside of the first dynasty, then this is an inaccurate statement. So any questions about that? Storm. This is I did not find any research that has been done But no matter what, it's implying that yes, they were they were sacrificed. Whether or not it was a ritual, whether or not it is like kind of this big hullabaloo, is unclear. But I wasn't able to find anything about examining the skeletal remains to see how they died. No, so the entire time during the first dynasty, the pharaoh would die, and then a group of people would be sacrificed to be buried with him. And so they were alive, and they were purposely killed and sacrificed to go and be buried with the pharaoh. There is a potential that people volunteered to be sacrificed as a way to either... No, that we don't. There's a potential that they would have volunteered to raise their status either in the afterlife or even to raise their current living family's status. That is a possibility. But it's not that they died and then they get buried with the pharaoh. It's that when the pharaoh died, all of these things are doing the same way. No. That's a very good question, Storm. Well, it's very hard to say. Most of the time, their animals are not typically buried with people. There is some indication there's like a pet antelope. Let's say this first. There's a difference in animal sacrifice. There is animal sacrifice for like religious ritual purposes. There is animal sacrifice for food and food that is preserved to go into a tomb. And then there is the not very popular, but like, did they kill a pet so that it can go with them to the afterlife? In this case, it appears that they did do that for dogs. Whether or not they were actually pets or they were just hunting dogs or something, unclear. There are a couple... There's only a few that I know of. There's one dog that was found buried within the doorway of an Old Kingdom tomb. Unclear if it is a pet. Unclear if it is meant to be a... We'll talk about that, Bev. Unclear if it is meant to be like a protector and it's in the doorway. So it's not... we can't be 100% sure if it was killed... If it was already dead when they sealed the... Like... God, this is so hard to explain. If it was dead... If it was a pet that had died while the person was still living and then they buried it when that person died, or if they purposely killed it to be buried. Unclear. There is a princess in the New Kingdom who is buried with a antelope. Unclear if this was a pet of hers that had previously died or if it was killed and buried with her. It's kind of unclear. It's so rare that it's really hard to study. The cat mummies are a ritual that, yes, sometimes they are placed in tombs, but they were purchased by the living as like a sacred item and either buried in mass graves with all of these other ritually sacrificed cats and other animals, or in some cases buried with a deceased person, but it's more rare. You find these in huge cache tombs where you would buy this cat or this ibis or this falcon or this dog because you want to invoke whatever god or goddess that is associated with it, and then it would be buried. It sounds weird. It's almost like one of those, like, I'm weirdly gonna reference this. It's almost like one of those weird lock bridges thing. Like, you buy that lock and then you put it on that bridge and it will be there forever, and you'll think of it in your mind as something you did to protect something, in this case. Yes, and bull sacrifices was a very religious thing but they also kept the bulls so that they were the Apis bull, and that is much more associated with the priesthood and the pharaohs rather than like the general populace. No. No, Storm. Not that I know of. You think it just like wandered the palace, or do you think it was tamed? Oh, the antelope? Oh, no, the antelope's really small. He's a baby. I could find a picture of him later if you guys remind me. The antelope is a really weird one. I think it was a pet. I really think it was a pet. I always say I don't like using the word pet when you talk about dogs and cats because it's not the same connotation as pets are now. They were working animals. They did particular things, but the antelope makes no sense. And so I think that has to be a pet. There's also been lions, and baby lions have been found in Saqqara. So it's like, those things don't make sense to me, to be anything other than like an exotic pet or something. Yeah. Exactly, Wombat Hole. Yeah, the antelope is a very weird one. I don't get it. I don't get the concept of it. And thank you, Ashley, for the s'mores. Okay. Oh god, I think we still have quite a few. Oh god, okay. I think these get a little shorter, hopefully. Okay. This is a short one. Has anyone ever told you that people were buried alive in ancient Egypt? Because it's a myth! It's a myth! I need people to know that. I think most of you guys know this one, but I do hear it get brought up every so often. It's a myth. And I will say, I don't really have a lot of evidence to counteract this, but I know that we're going to talk about one specific thing that people always bring up that is a myth, that they talk about this and stuff. And these are the quote-unquote screaming mummies. There's a trigger warning. I'm going to show you guys some mummified human remains. So if anyone doesn't want to see them, I'll only show them for like a brief second. If anyone doesn't want to see them, slide away or just listen and stuff. And Vev, you actually can sometimes tell this, and that is like with forensic anthropology, you can kind of figure out some of this, but there are ways that you can sort of figure it out, but there's like a whole big thing that's like a little bit confusing. Spooky one, I don't believe they were mummified, but also I will say in the early dynastic period they barely were mummifying the pharaohs, so well, if they were mummifying the pharaohs, they were not very good at it because it did not last very long. So definitely probably not. If it was a bad mummification for sure. Okay, so I'm going to show you an image of these screaming mummies, and then we'll switch off of it. And I just want people to understand what I'm talking about when I say a screaming mummy. Oh, sorry, I forgot about this guy. Essentially, the screaming mummies, which I'll show you in the next slide, are one of the reasons that I hear this myth going around is because they look at these images of these mummies and they say, oh my gosh, they died this like horrible death and they must have been alive when they were like da-da-da-da. And I just hear like people talk about this. So let me show you the image of the screaming mummies. Here are two of them, both from the New Kingdom. And these are mummies that have their jaws like wide open and look like they are in pain and just have this expression on their face. And there are quite a few like this. Everyone seeing it? Okay. So, sort of, Vev, it is both because of the mummification process. The reason that their jaws open is either because of the mummification process, but even before the mummification process, it is due to rigor mortis. Rigor mortis will essentially tighten all of the muscles in your jaw, and it will leave your jaw very wide open. So it is like a part of the death process that you can counteract, but it means you have to literally like strap the jaw in, so that it doesn't do that. But it's a kind of a mixture of both like the dehydrating process of mummification and the original like rigor mortis in theirs. So if you ever see somebody describing a screaming mummy as somebody who died a painful death or was buried alive, we know that that is not evidence to that. And sorry, I'm trying to read. It is the way that a mummy currently looks usually has absolutely nothing to do with their death, with the minus of like a giant hole in their head. Although even sometimes that is because of what happened after the person was mummified. So to top it all off, I think it is really, really funny that people say that especially those mummies were buried alive, because you cannot be mummified alive. I want everyone to think about this. I know it's kind of obvious. You cannot be mummified alive. That is not possible. It is not possible. The act of mummification, the purposeful mummification, I will caveat this, but we will talk about natural mummification. But the purposeful mummification that the ancient Egyptians did was a very, very long process that included removing all of the organs and then separately drying the body for like 40 plus days. So there's no way that you could get mummified alive, because you would be dead before the mummification had even like started. And then when it comes to natural mummification, it's sort of possible, but it's not that possible. You would have had to die and then be in a place where there's enough airflow, dry airflow, for you then to become naturally mummified. So there's no way to mummify a person alive. It's just no way. And so it cracks me up whenever I hear people using those screaming mummies and say that they were buried alive, because I'm like, if it was buried alive, he would be a skeleton, because he could not be mummified. Like, mummification and buried alive just do not mix together. Yes, being dumped in sand, but even being dumped in sand is not going to give you the best mummification, because you need the dry air. Like, yes, if you were buried in sand in a very dry location, but if there's any possibility that you are going to get wet, you won't be mummified. So like I don't like the thing about a person being like locked in a tomb. If you were locked in a tomb and then you die, let's say you die of starvation, you have a better chance of being naturally mummified because of this space that has no airflow and is very dry. You have the potential to do that. Although it really needs like, I've heard like, this is sounding really weird because this is back to like my forensic anthropology days. The way that people get naturally mummified now is if you're stuck in attics. For some reason, like attics are like, it is a place that like warm air that is like very dry is kind of like going through the like that kind of way that the air is just flowing can naturally mummify somebody. Because we haven't found accidentally mummified people in Egypt. Yes, so it is, we are only talking about Egypt and stuff, and so this is just a whole big wide thing that it's just like, it's just silly. The concept of anybody being buried alive, being locked in a tomb and buried alive is like so hard to kind of like get around, unfortunately. It's just really hard to kind of prove. Thank you, Nat, for the offer of the libation. I have to go get more water. Put any questions you have in the chat. I will be 2 ticks. Okay. I don't know what I don't know what 2 ticks means. 2 seconds? I have no idea. All right. Okay. So, these were kind of in the middle because we were sort of going chronologically. These were some of like the middle myths that kind of could apply to like any time in ancient Egypt. We have, I think, 2 more about ancient Egypt, and then we have 2 to 3 about after ancient Egypt. Thank you, Rim and Grow Beards. I'm missing something. Did Tuna say something? I missed it. Oh, booby trapped. We just talked about that one. Yes, there is no evidence of booby traps. The only thing that we ended up talking about was preventative ways to distract or dissuade tomb robbers. That's the only thing that we talked about. They aren't really the pure definition of a booby trap, which is like an active thing to harm somebody. But yeah, I did just cover that. There's so many. I think you guys are gonna like this one though. Did Cleopatra VII invent the first vibrator with a bee in a box, or bees with bees in a box, or in a gourd? I know I've talked about this one before, but this is... You've never heard this one before? This one is everywhere on the internet. It makes me so mad. I just made a video about it actually a couple weeks ago because I saw 2 girls on a podcast talking about it, and they clipped it on TikTok, and I was like, this is wrong. This is not true. Okay. It's a myth. It's a myth. So this has been spread so in normal corners of the internet, not really one. Yeah. I knew you guys would like this one. This one's actually pretty simple to debunk. So it essentially, this is one that has been spread around so much, and it is not only just like unconfirmed, it is a verifiably fabricated myth. Like, it is verifiably. And I circulate an Egyptology thing, so I hear Egyptology things even if they're crazy. But I did not make this. This is on the internet out there. So the whole thing is that the concept is that it's either in a gourd or in a box, and whenever she wanted to use it, she would shake it, and the bees would vibrate, but not vibrate. But like, whatever. Okay, so the only source for this statement, the only source, comes back to a book that was published in 1992 called The Encyclopedia of Unusual Sex Practices by Brenda Love. She cites no sources to support her claim, and it does not appear in any sort of earlier source. So this story falls under this massive trend from ancient Rome all the way till now that over-sexualizes Cleopatra and degrades her abilities as a stateswoman and a ruler and anything. No, we have absolutely no idea where she got this idea. And the craziest thing is she only said box. The gourd idea comes up from nowhere. I have no evidence as to why it changed to a gourd. She says a box. Like that's like the weirdest thing, is that we have no evidence where the gourd comes from. And one of the funniest things is that an article that I read that debunks this theory also mentions that in some of these books, which are after 1992, that are continuously to like saying it, is that somebody's debunking this and they say, well, no, she probably didn't actually use like a vibrator of gourds with the bees, but she probably used a dildo or some other sexual advice. Sometimes it's said that it was given to her by Julius Caesar. And it's like, they're debunking this, and yet they're putting other things into the story. And they're adding other things that just over-sexualizes her and just completely, like, change it, like, just changes all of these things. And it's just, like, again, out of fucking nowhere. I have a slight inkling that this author heard it somewhere. But she never gave any citations. She never, like, nothing. It was just included in it that it was with the earliest vibrator and stuff. Very true. Romans didn't like being outwitted by a woman, so they wanted to slander her. And using her sexuality because she was a woman was important. Was a way to do that. And so we can kind of put this in. Yes, her father is a Ptolemy. I can't remember what number. 13? 13? Sometimes it's unclear to figure out the mothers, but of the mothers of a lot of the Ptolemies, because if I remember correctly, I think her dad was married twice, and so some people are not, we're not 100% sure which one is her mom, if I remember. This is off the dome, which is a little bit hard to confirm because I'm not as familiar with this era. But yes, they did they copied the ancient Egyptian pharaohs, and they did inbreed within sisters. Sisters and brothers would marry each other and stuff like that. Possibly some step siblings or like half siblings as well. It's a little bit harder. Oh, 12th. I was so close. I thought it was 13. Probably Cleopatra the 5th. But yeah, I think her mother is a little bit more contested because she had two sisters. She had Bernice, Arsinoe, the one I never can say, Arsinoe, and then her brother Ptolemy, I think the 13th. I think that's why I said the 13th. I think her brother is Ptolemy the 13th. So let's make it like a Gordon said. Yeah. Step mummies. Yes. Yeah. So that's that one. Now this one, the one that we're coming up, this is my Roman Empire. If I wanted to burn the Roman Empire to the ground, this is my Roman Empire. Cleopatra the 7th specifically said, "No man will ever find my tomb." Thank you for the follow. Yeah, 13th. I hate talking about this one because this one is just over a year old. Like, quite literally, it is just over a year old. It is, yeah, not very old. Not really, Vev. No, you are correct. There's not really any direct quotes from Cleopatra. So this is a myth. This comes from TikTok. This is like this is my absolutely thing that I hate. I want to really know which one you heard this on, Roxy, because I'm sure it's one that's really recent, but if it's on one that's earlier, definitely tell me which one. So yes, Big Tuna Neil, I think this has to do with that quote from Lord of the Rings. Anyway, I don't watch Lord of the Rings, but I know of that quote. But this is, I didn't show the picture of when I have traced, this is literally a personal research topic of mine because I was on TikTok when this happened. I did not put up the page of the original person that posted, but most people might know who it is, because I've hated this girl for a long time. Person on TikTok. So this is a flat out lie. And it's from TikTok, and it is the original post was by a TikToker who talked a lot about different types of history. If you can find it, Roxy, I would be very, very interested, but no pressure at all. I'm just very curious because this is gonna sound mean. I think she's too dumb to make this up. So I feel like she's heard it from somewhere. Because even to me, again, when I heard this the first time, I thought this might be real. Because I felt like I had heard it before. So I have only been able to trace this to TikTok, but it may have been earlier. And I'm going to leave that like kind of precursor because I'm not 100% sure. But this person who originally posted about history a lot and sensationalized ancient culture, never really went into any sort of deep dives. This person does not have a degree in history or Egyptology or archaeology. I believe they have a marketing degree. I don't even know if they still post anymore. And I don't want to see their content anymore. So I hope they don't. This is a smattering of screenshots of many, when you Google "no man will ever find my tomb," this is a smattering of the screenshots of TikToks that I've seen past this. And that it has just been repeated and repeated and repeated with absolutely no care for any sort of source. In some cases, they have even archaized the statement to try and make it sound older. This first one here is, somebody wrote, "Thou shall not allow man to find my tomb, but a woman is the key to the secrets of the gods. Forbid my tongue to speak. If a man were to find the tombs where I lie in forever slumber, he shall use the knowledge to destroy Egypt and rule mankind as we know it. But a woman can awaken me, and woman would love without fear of man." That's what this says. Now, going to that person's page, it indicates that this person is writing a book about this potential topic, but everyone in the comments thinks that this is the real quote. Like, everyone does. Everyone's like, "Wow, Cleopatra is such a beautiful person. Hi, Alexandria, my love. How are you?" We're talking about crazy things. Remember, we're gonna get to that. Yes, absolutely. So this is just all of the crazy TikTok shit and stuff that we have been coming about. Okay, sorry, I'm scrolling back. I'm trying to get all the... Yes, and like this is supposedly an actual image of her. I've seen this. This is in Berlin. This obviously is wild. This is probably more accurate in some ways. Honestly, this one's probably outfit-wise is more accurate, but it's always very hard. We're gonna talk about her tomb, and my theories about her tomb. No, Zulu. We do not really know what... We have, like, we have theories as to what Egyptian actually sounded like, but there's almost no vowels in ancient Egypt, in ancient Egyptian language, so it is a lot of guesswork. Linguists have worked back from Coptic, which is a still spoken language that derives from ancient Egyptian, and they've kind of worked their way back a little bit, but it's still, nothing is perfect. Big Tuna Neil, thank you so much for gifting a sub to Spooky One. Thank you so much. So here is the backstory of that original TikTok so that everyone kind of gets the context for this whole thing. So the entire debacle comes out of the recent discoveries at Taposiris Magna by Dr. Kathleen Martinez that you see here. If you don't know Dr. Kathleen Martinez, she is a very, very cool Egyptologist. My opinion of her has kind of grown over time. I was a little bit cautious of her at first, but she obviously is still, she's doing very good work. She is from the Dominican Republic, and she originally was a lawyer, then became an Egyptologist. She has since gotten an archaeology degree. I don't believe at the very beginning she had, which is why I was a little cautious of her. But she has the one of the permits to Taposiris Magna, which is a very big temple outside of Alexandria. And she has been, in her entire career, has stated that she wants to find Cleopatra. She wants to find the tomb of Cleopatra. And we know this, and we accept this, and we're like, yeah, sure, it's all good for everyone to have a goal. And she does have theories that Cleopatra might be buried in Taposiris Magna or in somewhere associated with it, because she believes that Taposiris Magna is a temple to Isis, and obviously Cleopatra VII associated herself very closely with Isis. But the problem is, Vev, we'll talk about that. Yes. The problem with this specific excavation and this discovery that prompted this video, the video that this girl made was an Egypt news video. It was a video announcing the news of a discovery made by Dr. Kathleen Martinez. It was not Cleopatra's tomb, but this TikToker said it was, and used that quote that she made up. Dr. Kathleen Martinez, in that recent, again, this is about a year and a half ago, maybe even getting up to 2 years, she discovered a large cistern system that went from the temple Taposiris Magna all the way down into the Mediterranean, and it would bring water into the temple, and then essentially she discovered a well. And so she discovered this, and it's got some crazy cool photos, and there were some really cool artifacts found at the bottom of the cistern, and it was really, really awesome. This TikToker makes a video and says they have discovered Cleopatra's tomb, even though they had not. No indication of whatever. Nothing. She makes this video. It goes absolutely viral. Dr. Kathleen Martinez, literally on her own Facebook page, has to say that this has nothing to do with Cleopatra. Like, absolutely nothing. Has nothing to do with her tomb, has nothing to do with her whatsoever. She literally has to say this on her Facebook page because of how the press just picked up this viral TikTok and just went crazy with it. And it was literally just a tunnel. There was no tomb, there was nothing in there. But this TikToker goes viral. So I have made a lot of videos about this, of like what my opinion is if we even have a tomb of Cleopatra, and this is the way that I find the best way to like kind of describe it. Is there are two things that you can possibly be looking for. You can either be looking for the tomb that Cleopatra during her lifetime would have been building for herself, as any pharaoh would have been doing, or you can be looking for the actual burial place of Cleopatra, because I do not believe that they are one and the same. The way that she died and the way that she was surrounded by the Romans, there is a chance that I do believe she might have wanted to be mummified because of her association, because of how strongly she studied ancient Egypt and knew the language and all of these things. She may have wanted to be mummified. Mummification takes 40 plus days, if not longer, 50 plus days. I don't think that she had enough power and enough manpower to physically take her and do that entire process. I don't think she had the time. The Romans were on her tail. They were watching her. She does not have that. The other option is cremation, which was more common for Greeks in general, and a lot of Greeks that were living in Egypt. That's fairly easy to do. You can do that relatively quickly. You still would need that power and that support from a group of people to be able to do that act and then bury you. I don't think she had that. 70 days. Yeah, 40 days for the drying and then lots of stuff, the things. She is a descendant of Greeks who ruled in Egypt, the Ptolemies. They are all descendants of Greeks. And because they were all inbred, they were even more so. It's Greek Macedonian. I know that's a contentious thing, but like Macedonian, if you want to be more specific. She was not Egyptian. There was probably no, if not little blood of Egyptian in her. She lived in Egypt. She ruled Egypt, and that was it. And so the big thing with this is that, what are you looking for? Yeah, sorry. I apologize whenever I say Greek when I mean Macedonian. For the most part, it's so strange to me how this actually happened, is that a lot of times Alexander the Great will just be called a Greek, like a Greek guy, even though he is Macedonian. And am I muted? No, I don't think I'm muted. Can you hear me? Zulu, you might have to refresh your stream. I'm not muted. Yeah, so I say that more because unfortunately, previous scholars have never acknowledged that it's Macedonian. If I said Macedonian Roman times, people would have no idea what I was talking about, because they historically, people have not acknowledged the difference of Macedonia and Greek, because Alexander took over the Greek Empire and then took over the Persian Empire. And so, like, I say that only, I know that she is Macedonian. It's just, also, I assume Ptolemy was from Macedonia, but he may have also been from Greece. I'm not 100% sure about Ptolemy specifically, but, yeah, that's a little bit, it's very hard to, her entire identity is questionable. I have no idea how she's ever identified. It's just very complicated. This is a very complicated time. Where was I? So are you looking for the tomb of where she actually was buried, or are you looking for where she probably wanted to be buried? Because I do believe that tomb might still be out there, because as most pharaohs did, you started building your tomb very, very early on. And I believe that structure might still be out there. But here's the other thing. Not a single remain of any Ptolemaic pharaoh, queen, princess has been found. Ever. In Egypt. They have none of them have been found. And to me, that is not a coincidence. To me, that means that it was a family burial plot. They were all in one location, whether they were mummified or cremated. They were all in one location. And so she, even though she was a little different than like all of her other like descendants, she might have built herself another tomb to be more Egyptian. But also, we really don't know how she identified. Identity is something that that is your own decision, and that changes over time. So it's really, really hard to say if she identified more as an Egyptian queen with this culture that is not technically hers, or with this Greco-Macedonian culture. It's not something that can be said. So in my opinion, if I have to guess what happened, I would guess that she was cremated and she was put in the Ptolemaic family crypt. And that crypt was most likely very close to the actual palace of Cleopatra and all of the different Ptolemies, which sunk into the Mediterranean during an earthquake a couple hundred years later. So, in my mind, I don't think that there is an ancient Egyptian style tomb that she created for herself. I really just don't think there is. It's hard because Alexandria is now so built out. So there may be someday we'll find the foundation of something that we believe to be that. I don't think it's preserved. I will eat my hat if we find an intact tomb for Cleopatra, unfortunately. I just don't think it's possible. I think it was too chaotic of a time for her to get the full trimmings. The other thing is the Romans would have said something. If the Romans got access to her body, even if she was already, well, it's kind of a shame that she committed suicide, which is most likely what happened, because if they got access to her, they would have paraded her through the streets of Rome like they did her children. So, what type of hat? A beret. I think that would probably be the easiest one to eat. It's so complicated. We would have had writings about this. Yes, the asp is mostly Shakespeare. We don't have as much exact stuff. No, Vev, we don't. We have very little indication that she ever had a tomb prepared. And I know, Starm, so much time watching, playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey, I kept saying Macedonia. But yeah. And seeing the hate that Octavia had for Cleopatra, she was dumped in a mass grave, absolutely is a possibility. Absolutely. Because the thing is, I do still believe that she probably committed suicide, because if a Roman had killed her, then they still would have brought her to Rome to be paraded through the streets. But because she committed suicide, that's not like they don't get to brag that they did it. Sorry, Lena, I'm just seeing this, that you remember Dr. Martinez actually saying those words. Interesting. Sorry. Yes, they were valued in that, love you, Alexandra. Have a great rest of your night. Yes, they were valued by space and time, and different craftsmen that you had to have. If you were really poor, you just got a hole in the ground, and you didn't get mummified, and you didn't have any grave goods. You might have had a little thing of bread and a little pot of beer, but that's it. But if you were really rich, you would do a barter system, and you would work with craftsmen who were carving your tomb out, decorating it, writing it. You'd have to have a scribe, you'd have to have an artist, you'd have to have an architect, and then you'd have to hire different craftsmen to build the things for your tomb. So yes, they are valued in a certain way, based on what workers you can get to build it for you, if that makes sense. They find the family tomb under a parking lot. I mean, it's possible. A lot of it got sunk into the sea, but it is possible. It's probably under a hotel, just on the edge. So yeah, so the big thing with this is that the statement is getting floated around because Dr. Martinez is a woman. That is really the only reason that this is still floating around, because no man will find my tomb, but a woman will. That's the only reason this statement is getting floated around, is because of Dr. Martinez's work. And I would love to talk to her personally about what she feels about this statement, because it's just so intriguing. It's very intriguing. It annoys me so much because I still see it around here, and I still comment every single time. There's no evidence that she ever said this, because we have no direct quotes from these people unless it's written on a wall, which half the time it's propaganda, so you don't got anything. Okay. This might be my favorite myth. I don't know how many of you guys have heard about this, but this might be my favorite myth. This might be the reason why I wanted to do this lecture, is because I thought about this, and I was talking to you guys about it a couple weeks ago. We only have 3 more left. This is the third. There are only 2 more after this one. You have? Okay. So there is a story that people will say is that the ancient Egyptians had the first Cinderella story. FICO, you're gonna love this one. It's gonna be great. Yes, Alex, it's a possibility. Absolutely. Will we ever find them and identify them as Cleopatra? No. We have no idea. But yes. Oh yes, Fayum death portraits are some of my favorite, absolutely. Ah, Big Tuna Neil, we will talk about that one. Yes, so it is a myth that the ancient Egyptians had the first Cinderella story, i.e. the story of Rhodopis. And we're going to talk about what the story of Rhodopis is and why it is very similar, but not actually a Cinderella story. So, it's a myth! So, there are quite a few very, very early Cinderella type stories from a lot of different cultures. One of the oldest is going to be from the Tang Dynasty in China. I believe Yishen is a version of it. I wanted to find like a kid's version of the story. I believe that is a similar tale. And then the modern day one that everyone knows is this one by Charles Perrault. That is the kind of more standard one. The Grimm brothers, they took it again, but the Charles Perrault one is kind of the one that is closest to the original, to the one that we know now in the Western world, is this one. But there is modern day authors do claim that there is a Cinderella story that is from Egypt that is attributed to Strabo, who is here on the left. The problem is that this version that these modern writers, and I mean within the last 100 years, modern writers, the problem is that these modern writers repeat the story that is nothing like Strabo's. But because of the association with Strabo gives that story authenticity. And of course, some of these authors cite facts from the ancient story, which are supported in their claims based on Herodotus and other ancient sources that are not really very reliable now. So they're also kind of bringing in other things that are said about ancient history, but that are not very, very reliable. So, the thing that you need to understand is that there are going to be 3 versions of this story that I'm going to talk about. There is the one of Strabo. There is the first version of somebody claiming this to be an Egyptian, or the first, okay, sorry. There's going to be Strabo's. There is going to be a modern retelling of Strabo's account, and then there is going to be more modern accounts that change all the facts but use Strabo as a backup. Hi Josh. I know very little about it. I know that they are not real Egyptian hieroglyphs, and that they were copied by Australians who had been to Egypt, if I remember correctly. I did a little bit of research on this for one of my friends who's going to do a video about it. But that's all I know out of the basis of it. Baby Bat, I do have a list. I'm trying to think of where that is. I do have a list of, yes, Strabo is not Egyptian. No, this is Strabo and Herodotus are Greeks who went to Greco-Roman Egypt, at this point pretty much Roman Egypt, and wrote stories and wrote observations of the things that they saw. They are essentially travel writers, or anthropologists in a way. And so both of them wrote a lot about how they observed Egypt. The problem is that a lot of modern scholars, or not a lot of modern scholars, a lot of early Egyptologists took everything that these men wrote about Egypt as fact, even though they are talking about Egypt hundreds of years after Egyptians actually ruled it. And so they are getting a very biased perspective of what Egypt was like. And especially because they're probably not going to the local villages where there are actual, like, Egyptians who were sort of descendant from the actual ancients, like, talking to them. They were probably only hanging out in Alexandria and the more Greek-centered areas. So it's a very biased way of looking at the ancient world. Baby Bat, I do have books. I have ancient Egyptian books recommended, but I don't think I have the link. Give me 2 seconds. I forgot that I don't have the thing, like... Oh wait, no, that's not what it is. What is my new link? Shoot. Oh, a card. I've had different versions of this, like, link. Oh, are you actually kidding me? Sorry, this is now taking me. Baby Bat, if you go to this link and you scroll down, there is a book recommendations list that's on Amazon. And it has all different books that I recommend for all different types of Egypt history and stuff. And so you can look through them. And then if you do end up buying them, if you buy it through that, I get a little kickback from the videos. Yeah, Julia, I have been criticized by it, but often not from Egyptologists, but from classicists, because classicists can use their information accurately, but what these guys say about ancient Egypt is not, you cannot use it. And it was kind of, when I didn't really know about these guys until I did my master's, but when I did my master's, our professors were very adamant of being like, you have to take all these things with a grain of salt that they say, because it's not reflective of what actually ancient Egypt was about. Very funny, spooky one. He didn't check the stories, and again, like, he's talking to a very select group of people that didn't really know what ancient Egypt was actually like. And by that point, it was such a mixing pot of many different cultures that I don't like using the word pure ancient Egyptian, but like the way that ancient Egypt was like, it's honestly like if somebody came over here to America and asked us modern Americans, well, what was colonial America like? Like, what was that like? We would describe it completely different, and we would be telling stories of how America started. Because honestly, in that case, like, a lot of people would be saying, wow, like, enslavement was really bad in the Americas, and it was something like that was what the North and South fought about. But if you actually went to that time, that's not what people would be talking about. Like, it's completely different. You're asking a different perspective about something that they really don't know anything about. If that makes sense. Yes, exactly. It's even worse over in Egypt because it's 3,000 years. Exactly. Yeah. So, I've lost my notes. Where did they go? Okay. So, let's go over the first story, which is the actual story by Strabo. It has almost none of the elements of the popular modern day version. It was written in Strabo's geography book 17.33. Hi Kuza, what's up? We're talking about myths of the first Cinderella story. This version is actually from Egyptology guy on TikTok's book, and it is this original version. So I wanted to highlight that I found this on the website, that this is kind of a obviously Englishified version of the story. Strabo writes that while he was traveling through Egypt, he heard of a story of a courtesan named Rhodopis. And he specifically says, for whom the third pyramid of Giza was built. As in Menkare's pyramid. So everyone think about that. And that while she was bathing, an eagle snatched one of her sandals from her maid and carried it all the way to Memphis and dropped it in the lap of the king. The king then sent men in all directions in a quest to find the woman who wore the sandal, and when she was found in the city of Naucratis, she was brought to Memphis and became the wife of the king. That's it. We all can see that this is very similar in a way because it involves a shoe. That's literally the only reason it is similar, is because it involves a shoe. It is sort of like a Cinderella story, but it doesn't have any evil stepsisters. She does not have a poor life. There's no evil master. There's no festival. There's no, she leaves the shoe so that he can find her. There's no, this is no. This is a story from ancient Greek times that is supposedly from ancient Egypt. But there is no evidence of this story prior to Strabo talking about it. So, I will posit this, I'll throw this out there. There is the possibility that this story came from ancient Greece or ancient Rome and was Egyptianized. Like it became Egyptian. Like they said it's about a queen. Because obviously this thing says that this woman, when she died, she was buried in the third pyramid of Giza, the pyramid of Menkaure. So we don't know where this story came from. This absolutely could have been some sort of legend or story that existed outside of Egypt, and the Greeks who moved to Egypt brought it with them. It's very confusing. Yeah, no magic pumpkin, no fairy godmother, no ugly stepsisters cutting off their toes or their bunions to fit into the sandal. Yes, nothing like that. Carriages pulled by antelopes. Yeah, nothing really like that. Thank you, Daniel, for the follow. Welcome on in. Okay, so the only thing that's really similar with this story, it's a shoe that equals a royal wedding. That's the only thing that is similar. I will say later, Strabo actually identifies this woman as someone named Dorica, who was the lover of Sappho's brother. So that's very weird that he identifies it with a real life person. And then he actually then corrects Herodotus, who he refers to her as Rhodopis. And then Herodotus expands on this story and says that she was a Thracian, so somebody not a non-Egyptian, who was sold into slavery in Egypt and worked as a highly paid courtesan. So again, this story gets built upon by all of these other ancient Greek scholars. So it's like everything's getting built upon and such. Now, let's go to the story that the first person who interpreted Strabo's story in the modern era. The first version of this that is seen outside of just a translation of Strabo is written in 1920. It is written by this woman here, Mrs. Olive Beaupere Miller of Aurora, Illinois, in the United States. She wrote this again in 1920 for a series called My Book House, and it's for volume 3, which is this one, Through the Fairy Halls. She essentially creates a reimagined story of Strabo's account, intertwining it with some portions of the main story written by Charles Perrault in 1697. Yes, Herodotus is adding one little aspect into it that does make it a little bit more like Cinderella, but you'll see how it gets built upon over time. So, the Miller story continues to use the name as the woman as Rodopis. I do give her credit because she is taking something that is true and adapting it to something that children might like. And it does seem like she's doing that very deliberately, but she does claim this to be the first Cinderella story. She sets a disclaimer saying that the tale was the oldest of the Cinderella stories and was told to little children 7,000 years before Christ. So while I give her some credit that she is still referencing the original author, which is Strabo, she does put that claim that it is the first Cinderella story. So, she also identifies Rodopis as Queen Nitocris, who was a real queen of Egypt. And this queen is spoken a lot in early writings of Herodotus and Manetho, but they tell a story about her avenging herself for her brother's murder by inviting the killers to a banquet and then drowning them. It's like a whole different random story that doesn't seem to have much evidence as in and of itself. And so it's not really clear why Miller would want to associate Rodopis with this queen. It's very odd. So here is her story. Starts off very similar. There's a beautiful Egyptian maiden with a gilded sandal, and it was taken by an eagle while she was bathing in the Nile. It then switches to the perspective of the king, who was dispensing justice and also showing mercy to a farmer who could not pay his taxes. And he was very despondent the king was very despondent that he had no wife and family. The eagle drops the sandal in his lap, and he takes this as a sign from the gods. He then sets out on a nationwide search for the maiden, for whose foot will fit the sandal, but he still cannot find her. And you can see how they have added in the use of testing the sandal on every single woman in the land. Then the farmer that he had actually helped in earlier tells the king about a beautiful maiden and where to find her. And when he puts the slipper on her foot, it fits perfectly, and she becomes the queen of Egypt. So, still very, very similar to Strabo's. Honestly, the only thing that has been added is the act of testing the slipper on every single woman. But almost everything else is similar to Strabo's. There's really not much different. The farmer aspect is a little bit different, but that's pretty much all that's in there. How else do you find the owner? Yeah. But I always laughed about the Cinderella thing because I was just like, what is a perfect fit? Because my entire life, my foot has never been a perfect fit for shoes. And so like in my mind, it never made sense. But when you do think about in the time period that this was originally written, at least in like the Western world, you'd get custom shoes pretty much. Your shoes were meant to like fit you exactly. Starm, how dare you? How dare you insult my size 11 feet? I always attributed it to magic. That is what I always attributed it to, because it didn't make any sense to me why only certain things would like fit exactly. So I always assumed it was just my magic. It knew, the shoe knew, because it was created by magic. It was created by the fairy godmother. So that's why I always assumed it was like, oh well, the shoe is rejecting people, that like the shoe itself is magical. Okay. I will say she also did remove that she is a courtesan, because obviously this is for kids. So but she did a pretty like okay job. It's like very, very close. It's got a little bit of the adding in, but I don't think it's very far off from the original Strabo. So now, let's get into the worst version of this. This is the more popularized version of Egyptian Cinderella, which transforms all of these versions together. This one claims that Rhodopis is a poor slave girl who has been kidnapped from Greece and is living in Egypt in the company of other slave women who treat her poorly, though she is a kind-hearted woman who loves animals and works for a gentle master. One day, her master sees her dancing while doing his work, and he's so impressed that he gives her a pair of beautifully ornamented, because this is a children's story. These are the children's stories that we're talking about. Sorry. So he gives her the beautiful ornamented slippers. Soon after, the pharaoh, who is commonly called Emmaus in the story, which is an actual ancient Egyptian pharaoh, or ancient Egyptian name at the least. You have this version? I love this. This is great. Yeah, no bees in this story. Absolutely not. So the king Emmaus holds a grand festival, and the maiden is very excited to attend and imagines dancing in her lovely shoes. But the other slave girls are jealous of her for getting these shoes, so they give her a lot more work to do and then tell her that she cannot attend the festival until it's all completed. She watches as the other servant girls sail away on the barge while she has to stay behind. And she sings a sad song, which upsets a nearby hippo who splashes in the Nile and wets her slippers. She sets these on a nearby rock to dry when a great eagle swoops down and takes one of them with his claws. While at the festival, the king is sitting on the throne when the bird drops the slipper in his lap. He recognizes this as a sign from the gods and says whichever maiden's foot fits the slipper will become his queen. He tests every woman in the festival, but nobody fits it, and then he goes around the kingdom, fitting the sandal with everybody else. And then he finally finds the maiden, who not only fits the slipper, but brings out the second slipper to match it. And then she becomes the queen. So, this is the myth. This piece is, like, completely changed. It has, it is completely different than the original story of Rhodopis. I honestly don't, like, I know Miller claims that this is, like, the first Cinderella story. I don't blame her that much because her story is very, very close to the original. It's very close to Strabo's. Only a small portion of it has been changed. But, like, this is, yeah, you're right. This is literally, like the Disney movie. It's just, this is not what it's supposed to be about. And the problem I have more is that this story, the way that modern authors write this story, they claim that this is from Strabo, and it is not. It is obviously not. There are so many different versions that are different. What I really loved is that the article that I got all this about was on worldhistory.org, and they mentioned that this modern Egyptian Cinderella story is an example about how repetition becomes history in a digital age. And I find that's going on with probably all of these myths. And because a lot of these are not myths until the digital age began. Minus slaves built the pyramids, but that is kind of based on a lot of biblical sources. But this is very telling to, like us, because there's an article that you can find articles online claiming that this is the genuine history. It's accepted as face value simply because it has been found online, and multiple sites repeat this claim over and over again, which gives it greater weight. Yeah. So, repetition becomes history. I know. I was like, this is the best. This is the best. Repeat the lie enough until it becomes the truth. Or until it's so long that nobody can figure out what the truth is. Absolutely. All right. We only have 2 left. And everyone's been waiting for this one, I'm sure. Though you guys have heard me talk about this one a lot, but... And this one is very difficult to talk about, obviously, because it is not... It is sort of a myth. But it's this statement here. This statement here is a myth. It's very... I know, you guys are all waiting for this one, I'm sure. So, while there is truth behind this statement, the Victorians ate ancient Egyptian mummies, is false. Yes, I will just precursor this. They did make paint out of mummies. They did use cat mummies as fertilizer. They did apparently use mummies as firewood for trains. I will clarify, all of those things are true. They did do unwrapping parties. We have to do an entire lecture all about the weird things that the Victorians did to ancient Egypt and mummies. This one is not true. So, let's get into it. It's a myth. So, this one is harder to... This one's so annoying because it's so... I wish that this would be just an easy, like, one statement will be able to tell you that this is wrong, but it's really not. It's really hard. Ah, Big Tuna Neil! You have hit the nail on the head. This is exactly what we're talking about. Okay, so... The gist of the story is yes, people from the past did eat powdered ancient Egyptian mummies because they thought it was an all-cure medicine. But there's something that these are the easiest things that you need to understand. They did not approach doctors asking for powdered ancient Egyptian mummies. And this did not happen during the Victorian era. That is the biggest problem with the statement. This did not happen in the Victorian era. That is like the biggest thing that I have with this, is that like the biggest falsity of this statement is that the Victorian word. I don't care if you said people ate ancient Egyptian mummies. I would not be mad. It's this statement that I see spread around. I don't know why, but it is. This is the only statement I ever see kind of going around. And we'll talk about why that might be. So, the first thing we're going to talk about is bitumen and mumia. So, the item that they actually did want to ingest was called bitumen. It is a sticky, black, and highly viscous liquid or semi-solid version of petroleum. You can see it here, kind of in a dried resinous version. It's also known as asphalt, obviously, which is what parking lots are made out of. And it does occur naturally. This is a natural bitumen crater. I don't even know. But it also can be made into a refined product called pitch. So it's specifically called piss asphalt, I think is what it's called. Which I say is bitumen. Yeah. I always like the driveway. So, ancient civilizations found bitumen in various places around the Near East, like the Dead Sea and in Iran. Bitumen. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying a D. If it sounds like I'm saying a D, I'm not. I'm saying bitumen. Yeah, it kind of is. So it started, this entire like fad started off with Arab medical scholars from the 8th to the 11th centuries, and they called this mumia. That is spelled Mumiyya, mumia. And these physicians used it for salves for cuts, for bruises, for bone fractures, as well as internal medicine for ulcers and tuberculosis. Thank you so much, Nat. Have a very great rest of your night. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the ancient Egyptians didn't really use this for medicine because they didn't have an accessible source for it. At least in this area, the only places you could get it were on the other side of the Sinai Peninsula. And so they didn't really use it as a medicine, but if they could get access to it, depending on the time period, they could use it in glue, they could use it in mortar, or they could use it for waterproofing. And it has been debated for like hundreds of years if it was used in mummification rituals. In 2016, scholars actually tested 91 different materials from 39 different mummies, dating from 3200 BCE to 395 CE, which is like the entire time period of mummification in Egypt. And they found that bitumen was not used up until the New Kingdom, so around 1250 to 1050 BCE. And then it was extensively used in the Ptolemaic and Roman periods, which makes sense. They had more connections during that time period. Yes, we don't want to eat bitumen. And Spindle, we'll talk about that. Yes, the weirdness of the Victorians. So now let's talk about the medicine itself. So the Arab physicians that were creating this medicine and using it for quite a few centuries, it did not reach Europe until Europeans heard about it while they were in the Near Eastern area during the Crusades. They brought it back to Europe, and there was an interest and a need for it, because obviously it wasn't doing much, for it spread like wildfire. Why? I was thinking about this earlier. I say wildfire instead. I could, and I'm not even joking you, I might make a lecture about it because of the amount of weirdness when it comes to the Victorians and Egypt. I might make a lecture about it. I think it's needed. So that might be, who knows, maybe that'll be next month. I don't know why. When I was typing the notes, I said wildflower instead of wildfire, and I tripped myself up this time too. So, okay, I'm putting this down. Somebody write it in the Discord if you go to the lecture requests, and I will reserve it and I will make a lecture for it, because it's a really good topic. They bring it back to Europe, and people really want it. Now, this is where it gets confused with mummies. You may also ask why mummies are called mummies. It's sort of because of this. Like, there's not really a good reason why it's called mummies. Medieval Latin translators mistranslated the word from medical bitumen to mummified human remains. I'm not going to go into all the specifics of the mistranslations, but essentially, from the 12th century and on, it was continuously mistranslated and misidentified by many different European and then Arab scholars. And I'll give two examples. One that was mummia, spelled M-U-M-I-A, was defined as from the sepulchres with aloe and myrrh mixed in with the liquid of the human body. That was the definition of what mummia was. Another says that mummia is the substance found in the land where bodies are buried with aloes, by which the liquid of the dead mixed with the aloes is transformed and is similar to marine pitch. At least it's you. I know when you're trolling me. If Dapper was here, half the time he puts out fun facts that I can't tell are fake or not. He's like the boy who cried wolf. He said so many fake statements, and then finally he once said one true one, and we didn't believe him. Yeah, the liquid of the dead. Yeah. Still sounds like Marmite. It might as well. So essentially, they kept confusing any black liquid that would exude from a mummy as natural bitumen coming from the ground. And I will say, because obviously we know that some mummies did have bitumen on them in like the resin, it's an understandable confusion if they did see this liquid and they saw this resin being poured over the coffin or over the mummy itself. Like, it is kind of close. So Now mumia is all the rage in Europe after the soldiers have brought it back, and the need for it severely spiked. And the problem is that the natural supply of bitumen from the Dead Sea / Persia and Iran became very, very limited. And with all of the mistranslation and the confusion, scholars and physicians were trying to just find where they could get it. And they believed that if they powdered up these Egyptian mummies, that it would be the same as that drug. And we have very little evidence about how many mummies may have been powdered down to make mummia. We do know that it was a pretty lucrative trade between the 12th century and on. Unfortunately, Egypt was really closed off during that time, so we don't have records of this, like how much and how frequent and stuff. But the problem is that it keeps getting confused. Like this, like the terminology of this, which I hate to say, it makes sense because none of these people are talking to each other because they live thousands of miles away and these are multiple centuries and they don't have access to the internet. Like there's no such thing as the internet and books and stuff. And so it kept getting further confused. Well, in the 15th century, an Italian surgeon defines it as the flesh of a dead body. So again, at this point, it almost has nothing to do with the ancient Egyptians at all. So the key fact that people don't talk about whenever they really talk about this is that in the 16th century, Egypt banned the exportation of mummia. I will say, this doesn't mean that they were banning the exportation of mummies themselves, because we know that mummies still left Egypt in the in the 18th century. Like, we know that. But we know that they banned it. They banned the exportation of mummia, meaning that the mummia was being made in Egypt. Oh, here we go. Persian word for asphalt is mum, which becomes mummia, which then gets borrowed to that and then becomes mummy. Which is so weird that that's how that word comes about. Because it has nothing to do with, like, because even mummification does not have some, I'm assuming it does not have some sort of Latin root that means to be dried. It literally, I'm pretty sure, has to do with that, with the word for mineral pitch, which is really crazy. So what do they do? What do all these Europeans do when mummia is banned from being exported out of Egypt? Well, they still need their mummia. So this is when European apothecaries and physicians start to make false mummia out of regular old local corpses. And so they took local corpses, and this is considering 16th century, it's sort of the medieval era, sort of the Renaissance, like it is not the Victorian period. They start making mummia out of actual, like, just corpses that they would dry out and ground up. And the problem is that there's not enough records to tell us, like customers probably didn't know the difference, and they may not even known that mummia was actual ancient Egyptian mummies before that. They just thought it was a medicine. Like, remember, education is so low at this time. Like, they probably didn't know what it was, so they're not saying, I want mummia. The apothecary is just probably like, well, this is an all cure, this will help you with everything. And there obviously is very little medicinal uses of bitumen, and it can be toxic. So essentially, buffalo is a very great question. We have no idea. It was a powder, so it potentially could have been mixed with drink, but made into a tea, potentially. And I only know that out of I work at an apothecary, and it could have been made possibly into, well, I guess I don't know if they made it into tinctures and stuff. Exactly. Nobody makes records of these. We would never know. So we essentially know that this slowly begins to go out of fashion around the same time that Egypt bans it from being exported. And then by the 18th century, it is almost completely out of use. It does appear, the last time it is known to appear, it appears on a pharmaceutical company's list as late as 1924. But it's completely unclear as to what that product actually is. It could have actually been bitumen, but we don't know. Like, 1924 is crazy for it to be so late, but just because it appears on one pharmaceutical's price list doesn't mean that it was highly used. Like, it's entirely unclear. Who knows? Honestly, genuinely, we have no idea. I also want to just, like, this is a great little quote. In 1754, there was a Dutch physician who lists 4 types of this medicine, which really gives us the range of, like, what people could have actually been taking, and also the range of the miscommunication and mistranslation. So number 1, mummia was defined as an Arabian exudate, which is a seeping liquid out of a human person, from bodies embalmed in spices and asphalt. Number 2, Egyptian bodies embalmed with piss asphalt. Number 3, sun-dried bodies found in the desert. And number 4, natural bitumen of piss asphalt. Or piss asphalt, sorry. So there's the natural one. There is random sun-dried bodies. Could be current, could be old, who knows. There's ancient Egyptian ones. And then there is a liquid that comes out of a body that has been embalmed. That is such a range, obviously. All of these are, yes, very dangerous. Sun-dried tomatoes, exactly. So, obviously, like, the really big falsehood with this entire statement is it was not the Victorians. The Victorian period dates to the reign of Queen Victoria, which is 1837 to 1901. It was already out of style by that time. At least a century. At least a century. It may have been sold in small apothecaries or pharmacies, but we don't know what type of mummy that is. We don't know how often it was sold. We don't know really anything. I don't really know how this specific rumor started, but I think it has to do with a general mistrust and misunderstanding of the Victorians because of their participation in archaeology, historic preservation, science. They were really, really trying to figure things out, and often they did it in their own way. Most of the time it was not a good way. So I find anything that is in really recent history that is weird, quotation marks around weird, they are attributing it to the Victorians. And they did do a lot of weird things. I'm not going to say that they didn't. But I want to be clear, ancient Egyptian mummies was definitely not on the Victorian menu. So, any questions about that? We only have one more left, and it's almost midnight. I totally thought this was going to be a shorter lecture too, and I've been proven wrong. I need to start my lectures earlier, especially because I didn't have work today. I should have absolutely started this earlier. Yes, the liquid that comes out of a body that has been embalmed. Absolutely. That is what I said. Especially one that has been embalmed with spices. A spicy one. So yeah. Lots of stuff. Lots of crazy stuff. Alright. The last one. Napoleon shot the nose off the Sphinx. Because I know I need to drink more water. Ugh, okay. So, have you guys heard this myth? This one I think is fairly common. I got a lot of questions when I made a video about the Sphinx. I got a lot of questions about this one. So the myth is either that Napoleon himself shot the nose off the Sphinx with a cannon, or one of his troops or a couple of his troops shot the nose off. And yes, this is a myth. Just to give everyone a little bit more context, Napoleon Bonaparte had a campaign in Egypt in 1798. It was, oh no, Vev, we'll talk about that. Absolutely, we'll talk about that. So, this was a military campaign, and the occupation of Ottoman territories in Egypt by the French. Yeah, pretty much a complete disaster. On an Egyptology side, not as a complete disaster, but on a political side, yes, complete disaster. And I'll explain that in a second. The big thing is that, like, yes, it's a military campaign. Yes, there was, like, conquering, like, there were battles and stuff. But he also brought all of these savants, or essentially scholars, to record and research the area of Egypt with a lot of different fields, like geology, mathematics, chemistry, physicists, naturalism, botany, engineers, artists, and then these early archaeologists. And it's pretty unusual for a military campaign to do this. In some cases, this was an indication to his devotion to the principles of enlightenment, but it also was a way as propaganda in hiding the true motives of the invasion, which was essentially just increasing his power. He also did a lot of propaganda about how well it was going. He gave all of these medals to like certain soldiers, and like publicized it that like he's been gifting like these gold medals. And then apparently some British media stole letters from a French officer in Egypt, sending it back to his family, stole letters and then published them in British newspapers talking about how they were starving and they were all sick, and like how they were like not getting enough food and like all of this crazy shit. And the British media, like, because all they were doing was fighting, because essentially France takes over Egypt, and then the British come in and they take over France in Egypt. So French and the British were really beefing it out at this time. Oh, yes, I forgot to include this in this, Roxy, that yes, we do know that the Sphinx's nose was broken off by Aladdin and Jasmine, flying over and distracting a stone carver when singing A Whole New World. Absolutely. Ironically, that's weirdly closer to the truth. And I completely forgot about that until right now. So, the rumor is that either Napoleon shot off the nose of the Sphinx with a cannon, or one of his guards. It does make a lot of sense in some ways, because Egypt was a very closed off place to the Western world prior to the Napoleonic campaign, and it's reasonable to conclude that there was some sort of battle that Napoleon was having very close to the Sphinx that may have caused damage to some of the historical structures. Though the rumor is more he did it on purpose, or those other soldiers did it on purpose, not in an actual battle. So I think that's why this seems plausible, is that like if people know the story of why Napoleon's in Egypt, it kind of makes sense. So now that we as modern scholars have a larger access to old documents of people who went to Egypt prior to Napoleon, we can see that the nose was already missing by the time that he came to Egypt. It was already gone. So this is a whole slew, in generally chronological order, going across the side and then going along the bottom, of the Sphinx. And in some cases it's really small, so you can see it here. Most of these are at least, the oldest I think is 1600 something. I'm not I gotta look up the exact year, but 1600. And you got like a version here. A lot of these are very inaccurate. A lot of them are women. They are kind of depicted, like this one is very much depicted as a woman. I'm not sure if this is supposed to be the Sphinx, but it appears to be. And that is like, looks like a man. It looks like a bust of a man. This one is fairly accurate, but it's not as like stylized. It doesn't have a lot of details. This one is okay. And these are not always made by people who actually went to Egypt. These are sometimes made by people who talked to somebody who went to Egypt, and like they're obviously like passing it down. The Sphinx does have a gender. The Sphinx is supposed to be Khufu. Sorry, Khafre. It is supposed to be King Khafre. It's supposed to be a man. It is kind of, it is semi-genderless, but the face itself is supposed to be Khafre. And we'll talk about that, Bev. So then you get a little bit better, and then this one is really hard to see, but these pyramids, like, they don't make any sense. They don't look anything like the pyramids of Giza. This one seems to be like the most fairly accurate, sort of, but it's really hard to kind of see. And you see this, it actually says mummies on here. So these two are more accurate images. And you can see the one on the left dates to 1724, and the one on the right dates to 1755. So you have an image with the nose still intact, and then you have an image with the nose not intact. And so this tells us that more than likely something happened in between these 2 years, 1724 to 1755, that happened to the nose. I do remark that some portions of the nose are still attached, but the center portion is gone. But this one of Frederick Louis Norden made is considered like one of the most accurate early images of the face of the Sphinx, and also showing how deep the Sphinx was still buried. Yeah, leave the questions kind of to the end, because I'm gonna cover a lot of these things. But absolutely, you always ask questions, but I'm probably gonna cover it. So what we can see is that the nose of the Sphinx was already missing by the time Napoleon came in. And if you do look at the previous image, this is a painting that was done a little bit after Napoleon came, but you can see that is a very, very accurate image of what the Sphinx looked like, and probably what it looked like when Napoleon was actually there. Okay. Yes. In a lot of cases. So, this is also the earliest photo that we have of the Sphinx. It dates to 1849. It's actually by a woman. She wrote a travel book. She didn't publish it until the 1850s, I think, but she took the photo in 1849, which is really cool. Okay, so obviously we can conclude Napoleon did not shoot off the nose of the Sphinx, so what happened to it then? The archaeologists have examined the area around the nose, and believe that there is evidence that there were either long rods or chisels hammered into the nose to pry it off. There are images of the evidence of those chisel marks. There is one along the bridge of the nose, and then there is one beneath the nostril. And this essentially tells us that the removal of the nose was probably deliberate, rather than it being some sort of wartime accident or a blast from a cannon. So ironically, the chisel thing from Aladdin is kind of weirdly accurate, but not accurate in another way. So there are lots of stories on who possibly did this. There is no exact answer, but there are quite a few. So one of the stories is attributed to the 10th century Arab author, who said that it was the result of iconoclastic attacks, essentially meaning that the local Muslims wanted to deface the Sphinx because it was an icon of another religion and thus against the Islamic religion. In some stories, it has been attributed to the work of the Mamluks in the 14th century. And then in another story, it dates to the 15th century from the Arab historian al-Makrizi. Nakirizi. Sorry, I can't read that. This story says that the nose was damaged by a person named Muhammad Sa'im al-Dar, and he was a Sufi Muslim, and in 1378 he found local peasants making offerings to the Sphinx in hopes of increasing their harvest. Unfortunately, this means that they declared the Sphinx an icon, and in an act of iconoclasm, it was defaced. So, lots of different stories. We're never going to know the exact answer. Those images of all the drawings of the Sphinx do help us, but unless it's a very accurate image, it doesn't really tell us whether or not, like, if there's actually sort of, like, I would love if all of those drawings were more accurate, because it would give us a very good timeline, because essentially it's a primary source. It is somebody who is looking at the Sphinx and drawing it and seeing it how it is. The problem is so many of them are so inaccurate that you can't trust it, unfortunately. And yes, iconoclasm was damage happened in a lot of different places as well. To make them go away, yes, silver, very similar. So, very good question, Alex. I forgot to write this down. So, I thought the nose was lost forever. But somebody on my Instagram told me that there is a piece of a nose. And now I'm trying to remember where it is. I think it's at the Egyptian Museum. Because there is a piece of the beard at the British Museum. I know that the Sphinx had a beard, possibly attached to later in time, but I know that the beard is at the British Museum, and I think the portion of the nose is at the Egyptian Museum, but it's not on display. It's not something, like, literally this person had to send me this, like, random photo of it that it's, like, really hard to find. Yes, Vev, there is. Victorians ate the nose. There is a rumor that there's a room underneath the Sphinx, but that is a unverifiable conspiracy theory at some point. So yeah, I feel bad because I really would like to use all of those images as, like, an archaeological record, but you just can't, unfortunately. And so it more than likely it was some sort of damage via iconoclasm, which is very ironic because the Sphinx is not a god. I think it's kind of funny. Like, also, like, obviously it's supposed to be Khafre, who becomes a god when he dies, but, like, the Sphinx itself is not a god, so I think it's kind of ironic that but it is an icon, I guess, if you want to use that definition. Thank you, Fadi. I'm so glad you like that. All right. This is the end of my lecture. I hope you guys really enjoyed and learned a little bit about some of the different myths. I would really like to hear which was your favorite myth that we talked about, and which ones you didn't know about, which ones you did know about. I would really love to hear which ones you guys liked, because there was an interesting range, and I don't think I really missed anything. Does anyone know of ones that are, like, not conspiracy theory, not aliens, and not, like, unverifiable hypotheses? But yeah, I would love to know which ones you guys liked the best. And I do feel like a mythbuster, and I'm very happy about this.